in 2017, when the live-action Beauty and the Beast movie was first out in theaters, a friend of mine from college happened to be in town, and so the two of us decided to go watch the movie together. Now, the first night that we tried to go was, I believe, a Saturday night, and the movie theater was in this cute little downtown area, and when we got there, it was already sold out. So we regrouped and went out the next day, like a Sunday afternoon, and also we went to a different theater. This theater was in a shopping center that was half empty, half the storefronts there, just no shops in them. I think there was even a little construction going on at the far end, but the theater itself was fine, and we were both very excited to see the movie. Y'all can see my shelves back here of Disney Princess and Disney Princess adjacent dolls. This movie should have been right in my wheelhouse, right? We watched the movie, left the theater afterwards, and neither of us said it was bad, I'm pretty sure. I don't think either of us were ready to admit that it was bad. We were both hyped for this movie. We wanted it to be good. But the sense of disappointment was very palpable. Now, like I said, the shopping center was half empty. There wasn't a Starbucks, there wasn't a Pete's Coffee, any sort of cafe, not even an ice cream shop that had a table and chairs out front. There was nowhere really where we could just sit down and chat for a while. And I believe my friend was on a tighter schedule that day. For whatever reason, driving somewhere else to hang out for a little while was not in the cards. So what we ended up doing was just walking back and forth the length of these shop fronts, just talking for a good 15 minutes, maybe half an hour even, just trying to sort through our feelings on this movie. And I think that to this day, there is still a small part of me walking back and forth in that empty parking lot, asking myself, what the hell just happened? Part 1, Adaptations, Retellings, and Sequels. Oh my. So despite the Beauty and the Beast movie being bad, and it was bad, no matter what we would or wouldn't say at the time, it was bad. It did do commercially very well, very successful. So of course Disney continued to make more of these live action adaptations, and those movies continued to be commercially successful. So of course they continue to make more and more. And the movies also continue to be, generally speaking, pretty bad. And I think a lot of people kind of treat that as almost a foregone conclusion these days. Yeah, the Disney live action movies, they're bad. But the reality is that shouldn't be surprising, right? Disney has the time, the money, the resources to make good movies, and they have really great source material they're working off of here. There's no reason that these movies shouldn't be good, or at the very least, okay, right? And they had success earlier on. The Alice in Wonderland and Maleficent ones got kind of mixed reviews. I didn't like either of them, but they at least had some positive reception to them. And the Cinderella movie, my favorite Cinderella movie adaptation, and honestly my pick for most feminist Cinderella movie adaptation. You can fight me on that. And then the Jungle Book one was also really good. Not for me personally, but it was really well done. A lot of critical success for that. So we had, good track record starting out. But then the live action Beauty and the Beast happened, and it just has been mostly downhill from there. So a lot of times when people are discussing these movies, typically the reason that they give for why these movies are probably bad is that they're just lazy cash grabs. And cash grabs, yes, obviously, right? Disney's a huge corporation. Anything they do is going to be a cash grab to some degree or other, right? But lazy, Like, look, I grew up in the time of the direct-to-video Disney sequels. I know what it looks like when they're doing a lazy cash grab. And Beauty and the Beast is many things, but I don't know that I would say lazy was one of them. There is a lot of effort on display here, much of it misapplied effort, but still effort. It doesn't strike me as lazy. There's something else going wrong here. So the question becomes, what is it? And so that's the question we're going to try to unpack here today. And specifically, we're going to look at it from an adaptational standpoint, right? How did they start with such great source material, right? How did they start with this and then end up with this? Before we can start unpacking that, we really do need to kind of define what movies we are talking about when we say Disney's live action adaptations. Like if you look at just the Wikipedia page for it, there are actually 21 movies listed that have already been released, but we're not looking at all 21 of those movies. First of all, there are 3 of them that were released back in the 90s, early 2000s, which are very much not a part of any of this. Then there's also the Sorcerer's Apprentice movie that came out in 2010, which technically does fall within the range of the beginning of these live action adaptations that have been coming out. But from what I can tell from the production, it really wasn't intended to be a live action adaptation of the, one little thing from Fantasia. It was really more Nicolas Cage wanted to do a sorcerer movie, and then they just slapped Sorcerer's Apprentice on top of it for, that's your lazy cash grab, right? So we're not going to count that one. Then also there are 2 sequels that Wikipedia packages with these. That would be the Alice in Wonderland sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass, and then also the sequel Maleficent, Mistress of All Evil, which I don't really count because at that point they're not adapting the animated source material anymore. They are just making a sequel to the previous live action movie. So that gets us down to 15 movies, and I watch all 15, and I'm doing 10 fingers up, like I think that means 15. So I watched all 15 of these movies, and after seeing them all, I went ahead and eliminated another 5 of them because, again, they don't quite, for me, meet that standard of being an adaptation of the animated source material. So included in those 5 that we're eliminating is Alice in Wonderland and Christopher Robin, because those are both really intended to be sequels to the animated source material. And then Cruella, which is meant to be a prequel to 101 Dalmatians. And to be honest, it doesn't really even achieve that. Like, if you're interested in The Devil Wears Prada, but as a full-on revenge fantasy and also set in 1970s London, fully recommend Cruella to you. It's a great movie for that. If you're looking for a live-action adaptation or prequel to 101 Dalmatians, that ain't it. And then the remaining 2 that we're eliminating would be the Cinderella movie, My Beloved, and also the Peter Pan and Wendy, which is much less beloved. And because those 2, to me, are not so much adaptations of the animated movies as they are just retellings of the same source material. And to kind of give you an idea of what I mean by that, if we look at the 2015 Cinderella movie and if we look at the animated movie from 1960, the 2 of them have as much in common with each other as either of them have in common with the movie that came out in the 90s with Brandy, right? All 3 of them are just various retellings of the original Cinderella story. So it's hard to really assess this as an adaptation when it's not trying to be an adaptation per se. That leaves us with 10 movies, actually 10 this time. 10 movies that I have watched and that I consider to be, actually adaptations, and then I want to pack, okay, what went wrong here? And since we don't have all day, like probably a literal 24 hours for me to sit here and talk to you about every single problem with every single one of these movies, What we're going to do instead is I have identified certain problems that I've noticed as a trend across these movies. And not every movie has all of these problems, but most of them have multiple problems. And we're going to look at those individual problems, and then we're going to use a different movie for each one as a case study to unpack, what exactly does that look like? Why does that create a problem? Why does it make it a bad movie? And one last thing I do need to clarify before we dive into it, one thing that is not going to be considered a problem here today is they changed it and now it sucks. So when I say that, I am coming from the perspective of someone who normally is a big fan of faithful adaptations, right? Not as militant about it as when I was a wee child, but definitely feel like on the whole, it's best to be as faithful as you can be while still trying to make a good movie and making what changes you need to make that happen. However, when I espouse that opinion, I'm generally talking about like books that are being turned into movies, or sometimes maybe it's a stage show or like a video game, or something that is significantly different than a movie, such that even if you were to make 100% faithful adaptation of a book into a movie, those still are going to be two very different experiences, right? Like, I don't need to explain that reading a book and watching a movie are two different things. So there is value in creating something faithful, and not everyone, but I feel like a lot of people, when they are watching an adaptation like that, they want to be able to re-experience the story that they had originally enjoyed, in a book, now on a screen where they can actually see stuff happening. However, again, that's a book to a movie. An animated movie to a live action movie, there's not a lot of difference there. It is a slightly different experience, but it's not that different, right? If we took our animated movie and then made a shot-for-shot remake just in live action instead of animated, I'm sure there's artistic merit in that. It's like, I don't want to question or litigate, what's the artistic value of having this movie that is almost the same but is slightly different. But we still only have limited opportunities, limited time and resources. Like, Disney has a lot of resources, but they're not unlimited to make movies, and especially to make big blockbuster movies. And so if we're making a movie that is basically identical to a movie that already exists, we gotta ask, even if there is artistic merit in doing so, is it really worth our time and effort when it is, again, so limited? So because of that, we are going to be taking change in the story as a general good. Now, specific changes can be bad. Many of them are bad, but the existence of change, we're going to say, is a good thing until, the change itself proves otherwise. So with that groundwork laid out, we can go ahead and move on to start looking at the various problems that we have, starting with problem number 1, understanding your source material. So I feel like this one is so obvious it shouldn't have to be said, but I watched the movies and it does need to be said. If you're going to make an adaptation of a story, you need to understand the story you're adapting, right? And not just like, oh, I know the plot and I know who the characters are. You have to have a very deep understanding of the structure of the story as a whole, of each scene, each line. What are they doing? What's the function of the story? For each character, you need to understand who that character is in terms of, their personalities, their wants, their goals, their fears, weaknesses. You need to understand what the function of that character is in the story. You need to understand their arc, assuming they have one. You need to be able to understand the themes of the story and what messages it's trying to get across and what messages it's actually getting across, because those are not always the same thing. And the reason it's important to understand all that is because in a well-told story, as most of these Disney animated movies are, all the pieces are going to interlock together and all affect each other. So if you change one thing, it's going to have long-reaching impacts on everything else. So you need to make sure that the changes that you are making are having the effects that you want it to have. So for this problem, we're going to look at the live action Mulan movie. And specifically, we're going to look at 3 parts from Mulan's character arc. Because honestly, if I tried to talk about every problem that this movie seemed to have with understanding its source material, again, we'd be here all day. So just 3 parts from Mulan's character arc. We're going to look at 1, why did Mulan run away to join the army? 2, what was the purpose of the avalanche scene? And 3, why did Mulan go back to the army after she was banished for being a girl, right? So starting with the first one, why did Mulan join the army? And for both the animated and the live action version, the short answer there is she did it to protect her father, right? Her father was a war veteran who in a previous war was presumably injured in some way and is now disabled. And so he would die if he went to war again. So Mulan is going to take his place to protect him. And as a side note, really kudos to the animators and storyboard artists in the animated movie. That first scene with her father, they are really doing the most to communicate to us that, hey, this man is disabled. Look at him. He's got a cane, without ever actually explicitly saying that in any ways. So it was really well done. Good job. Much better than anything that I saw in the live action movie in that same regard. But getting back on track. So in the animated movie, right, that is the short answer, but even in just the very short time that they have in the beginning of the movie before Mulan runs away, they pack so much more in there to really help us understand Mulan's character and understand on a much deeper level why she would do this, right? So it's not just that he's her father, it's about their specific relationship. There's the fact that he is a very loving and supportive father to her, right? When we first meet him, he is praying that she's going to do well at the matchmaker that day, which is important because it lets us know that this is something that's important to him, that he really wants this to go well. Which means that when she fails, and his reaction is not to be upset or to scold her, but to comfort her and to try to make her feel better about her failure and be like, it's fine, you'll get it next time, don't even worry about it. We understand that this was something that was important to him, but Mulan's, happiness is more important to him. So obviously this is a very loving and supportive father. Then we have the other side of this father-daughter relationship where in that first interaction between Mulan and her father, she is bringing him his tea. And we're told that this is like a medicinal tea that the doctor has told him to drink. And he is more distracted about her, going to see the matchmaker while she is focused on him and making sure that he drinks his tea that he's supposed to be drinking. So that tells us that from Mulan's end, she helps to take care of her father, right? We kind of get the vibe that maybe he's not always the most on top of taking care of himself and his disability, but she steps up to make sure that he is taking care of himself, right? So that makes it a shorter leap for us that she would step up to take his place because it is just an extension of what she was already doing, taking care of him and his disability. And then even beyond that, it's not just about Mulan's relationship with her father. It's about her relationship with her family as a whole. The movie gives us a very clear sense that Mulan is not really comfortable or used to the very hyper feminine role that she is expected to play, that they dress her up for the matchmaker. But at the same time, even though this is probably not something that she would want on its own merits, we can tell that it is something that she wants to do for her family, right? She is not upset or resentful that this is being asked for her. She is just hoping that she can do a good job and make her family proud, bring honor to her family, right? So that desire for her family's well-being and to do right by them also kind of builds into her decision to leave, right? She wants to protect her father specifically, but also wants to protect her family and, the harmonious nature of her family as a whole. And then so it goes beyond even her relationship with her family to Mulan's relationship with herself. Like I said, she's not super comfortable with this hyper-feminine role. It's not something that she would do for its own sake. So this resentment is building up, but it's not building up towards her family for forcing her to do this. It's building up towards herself for not being able to perform that role well enough, right? She's angry at herself because she doesn't think that she is good enough. And so going to join the army and, protecting her father is something that she thinks that maybe she can do to prove to herself that she is good enough. She is someone who is worthwhile and can accomplish something meaningful, right? And we have all of that, all those underlying feelings as a baseline, building the tension towards this moment at the dinner table where she objects and tells her father that he shouldn't go, and he snaps at her and tells her to know her place. And because we have established this relationship as normally being very loving and supportive, when he snaps at her like that, we can feel the betrayal of that moment, right? This is not how her father normally treats her, and that hurts. So when Mulan is very upset by that, we understand it. And then when she sees her mother and father fighting, she's outside and she sees them, their shadows through a window, and sees the way that this whole situation is, really putting strain on her family. She turns and she has this moment of defiance where she is like, I'm gonna prove my father wrong. He's telling me to know my place, and that was hurtful and betrayal. And I'm gonna prove him wrong for that. And I'm gonna prove that I can do this. I'm gonna prove to my family that I can do this. I can prove to myself that I can do this, that I am good enough. And so there's all of that going on, all of that building. So even though the short answer is she does it to protect her father, the reality is the movie puts a lot of time and effort into showing that this is a very complex decision made by a complex person who has lots of different motives for things. Then let's go look at the live action version and what they do. And just on a baseline, they seem to change that opening sequence to change the nature of the relationship that Mulan has with her family, which, as we said before, is not inherently a bad thing, is a good thing as long as it's done well, right? So this version of Mulan, rather than having a very loving relationship with her father and with her family, and rather than really wanting to do the things that she feels like will make them proud of her and will reflect well upon her family, there is a lot of tension in the relationship. Like I said, animated Mulan, her resentment is building inwards. With the live action Mulan, her resentment seems to be building outwards, right? She has a way that she wants to be, but that she is not allowed to be because she is a daughter. So having that resentment build where Mulan wants to be free to be herself and express herself, and that is her real priority rather than, doing right by her family, that can work very well in this other, new version of Mulan, right? But the problem is this story doesn't seem to change her reason for leaving, right? The lead up leads to a Mulan who leaves not for her family, but leaves for herself. as a chance to be herself and express herself in ways that she is not allowed to at home, right? The very baseline aspect of this is the fact that as a daughter, she's not allowed to use chi, but she's really good with her chi and she likes to use it. And if she runs away to become a warrior, then she will be allowed to use her chi and to explore it to the fullest extent that she can. But that's not why she leaves. And we know it's not why she leaves because it takes her a good long while of being in the camp before it even occurs to her that she could be using her chi as a warrior. It's not even something that ever actually occurs to her in and of itself. It's in a tense moment, she kind of uses it on instinct, and then the leader of the camp is like, why haven't you been doing this whole time? And she's like, oh, I don't know. So if she had been run away to want to express herself, that should have been a key component of why she did it. So no, the movie keeps it as, well, she runs away to protect her father. Like, she even has a line where she says to him, you know, he's sharpening his sword and whatnot, and she says to him, you know, if I were a son, then I could take your place. You wouldn't have to go, right? So this is very much her thinking about, I could do this for you, I could protect you. But the relationship with her father has not been built up to that degree. We don't get that supportive moment where she fails at something important and he's like, it's fine, don't worry about it. What we get is he is putting her in a box just as much as everyone else, and she is just as resentful of being put in the box by everyone. It's not what she wants. So we see the problem here is that the animated movie had the answer to why does she run away to join the army, to protect her father as the short answer, but had a lot of complex stuff underlying that. And the live action movie decided to change that complex stuff underlying that, but did not recognize the way that that should have changed her motives for running away. Second thing, the avalanche scene. So in the animated Mulan, a huge part of her character, her main strength as a character, is her very clever and creative thinking. We see that from her from the very beginning of the movie, right? When she has her dog basically help her do her chores and feed the chickens. And they also have like the movie shorthand where she sees two guys playing a board game and she looks at it for a second and then makes a move and completely turns the tide of the game. So we understand that Mulan is very smart. She's very clever. And she's like an outside of the box type of thinker. And I do think that they probably chose that as a particular strength of hers, just because it works well with the way the movie's trying to talk about gender, right? Because that sort of clever thinking does not fit inside the hyper feminine box that Mulan is trying to fill, where she's supposed to be quiet and obedient. And it also doesn't fit inside the man box that she tries to fill when she runs away to join the army, right? That's more about being tough and strong and physical strength. But Mulan learns over time not to force herself into any of those gender boxes, to embrace herself and what makes her unique and what she is good at, that clever and creative thinking. And as she does that, she continues to grow and succeed. So we see that at the army camp, she's doing poorly. And then she has her clever idea. Instead of letting these weights weigh her down as she's trying to climb this pole, she uses them to create an anchor point for herself to help her climb the pole. And that's her turning point, where she is using now this clever thinking, and now all of a sudden she's doing good at all of her army training lessons, right? So then the avalanche is sort of our end of Act 2 moment, where we get to see how her clever and creative thinking can really work and be beneficial in the real world, right? She figures out, hey, instead of using my cannon at Shan Yu and killing just this one guy, but leaving the whole army still, I can point it at the mountain and cause an avalanche and take out the whole army in one go. And so when that creative solution works, it helps signal to us as the audience that yes, her her creative thinking, her cleverness is her strength. It's how she can succeed. And also it signals for Mulan that, hey, you're good at this. Like it boosts her confidence. And then she takes another dip when they then find out she's a woman and don't care anymore. But it is a moment where she can prove to herself that she can do this, that she is a competent and capable person. And that it all ties back into, you know, her strength that she has throughout the movie. And it continues on into the climax as well. How they ultimately are able to beat Shan Yu and the Huns is with Mulan's creative plans that she comes up with. The live action movie maintains this avalanche scene and even increases the amount of cleverness involved, right? Because in this one, instead of her just pointing her own cannon at the mountain, she has to trick the Rorin into pointing their own catapults at the mountains, and they cause the avalanche rather than her. She tricks them into it. The problem is, this Mulan, being a clever creative thinker, is not her strength. It has not been her strength for the entire movie. Her strength in this movie is her ability to use chi to a degree that's far greater than anyone else, right? And the movie is pretty consistent about this throughout everything else. Mulan has very strong chi, and when she uses it and allows herself to use it and feel confident and comfortable in using it, she's extremely powerful and accomplishing. She can get stuff done. But in this big pivotal moment with the avalanche, she doesn't really use her chi at all. She uses it in other aspects of the battle before that moment, and I think there's a little bit afterwards, but she does not use it to cause the avalanche. And so this moment then sits out of place with the rest of the movie, right? They change Mulan's character arc, her character strengths, but they did not change this moment because this is an iconic moment, right? And didn't really think about, well, you can't just leave. It's not an iconic moment if it doesn't have the proper build up to it. Like they could have kept the avalanche scene and just made her like set off the avalanche with her chi somehow. Like, I don't know, she could kick an arrow into it. She kicks so many arrows in this movie. Okay, I think it's actually like only 2 arrows maybe, but 2 arrows is a lot of arrows to be kicking. So yeah, she could have set off the avalanche with her chi somehow, and that could have worked. But they kept it as, and again, even enhanced the degree of which she was being clever about it, and it doesn't make sense. And so finally, our third one, why does Mulan rejoin the army? And I want to talk about this one mostly just because I was really impressed with this sort of elegant thing that the animated movie did here. So obviously on a baseline level, we as the audience don't even really need an explanation of why she would go back. We know that she's a good guy and she's the only one who knows what the bad guys are up to at this point. So of course she would go back because she's a good guy and that's what good guys do. Like, we don't need a further explanation for that. But the animated movie gives us this very sort of simple, subtle explanation here, where at the very beginning of the movie, Mulan, when she's doing her whole getting ready for the matchmaker, she walks by these little kids. There's a little girl who has a doll, and there's 2 little boys who have toy swords. And one of the little boys steals the doll from the girl, and Mulan takes the doll back and gives it back to the little girl, right? Then with Shan Yu, his like falcon, I think it's a falcon, steals a doll and brings it to Shan Yu, and that prompts him to go to the village where the little girl that owned this doll lives, to attack the army there and decimate the village. And then Mulan arrives at the village later, and she finds that same doll again, and she has her own sort of private moment of grief and remembrance for this little girl that was obviously killed by the Hun army when they came through this village. And so the movie is telling us in a very subtle, basic way that that Shan Yu is a man with a sword who kills little girls with dolls, and tells us that Mulan is someone who protects little girls with dolls from boys and men with swords, right? That's who her character is on a very fundamental level. It's who she's always been. So that's why she goes back, because that is always what Mulan was going to do. She's always been a protector. The live action movie changes it. So after Mulan is banished from the army, she has an encounter with the witch. I don't think she actually gets a name in this movie, which is not great if this is supposed to be like feminist girl power, but okay, the witch. So the witch tries to get Mulan to join her. They're gonna team up, and so she says something about join me in your rightful place along those lines. Because, you know, Mulan, the witch, is a woman who is very good at using chi, and Mulan is also a woman who is very good at using chi, and the witch was ostracized and called the witch because she's a woman who uses chi, and she's like, hey, they're going to do the same to you. They've already done the same to you, so we should be on a team. You know, again, join me in your rightful place. And Mulan comes back with, I know my place, which is a callback to earlier, that dinner scene. They do have the same dinner scene where the dad snaps at her and tells her to know her place. That was in the animated movie as well. Of course, it hits a little different in this movie because it's not a betrayal. It's just a continuation of the way her dad's always been with her. But it can work as this, you know, triumphant moment if he was telling her, know your place. You're a daughter. You need to be in the daughter box. And now she is triumphantly saying, I know my place. That can be a turn of, hey, you try to force me in the box and I understand who I am. I don't belong in this box. You know, I should be free to be myself. But she follows it up with this comment about my duty is to protect the country and the emperor, which turns it from, you know, I know my place. I'm not going to be boxed in, you know, by your rules or whatever. I should be free to be myself, to I know my place. It's not the daughter box. It's the warrior box. You guys put me in the wrong box. I would like this box, please. Which is just not very empowering. And it's, I don't know necessarily that it's even actually about, do you understand the source material or not there? It is on a thematic level, suggests that this movie doesn't really understand what the animated movie was trying to do with gender. But just in a character level, it's just not very inspiring. Problem number 2, understanding your own material. Okay, so this problem is basically the opposite end of the previous problem, right? With the previous one, we're talking about how not understanding the source material you're adapting can create trouble when you're making changes. This side of it, though, is when you're changing your source material, you're not just changing something that exists, you're also adding something of your own in there in some respects. And you need to understand that stuff that you're adding just as much as you need to understand the stuff that you're adapting. So I'm being a little bit loose here in terms of what I mean when I say your own material. I'm just basically talking about anything that they're bringing to the table, right? That can be original stuff that they're coming up with for this movie, but it can also be stuff like the various skills and talents of the people that are working on this movie. It can be stuff like just the fact that it is a live action and what you're bringing to the table through that. And we will talk about that one specifically more later. It can be other sources of inspiration that you're bringing to the table that just aren't just that, you know, source material that we're adapting. Just a wide variety of different things that I could cover. So for this one, we're gonna look at the Aladdin movie. And specifically, we're gonna zero in on the genie. And part of the reason we're doing that is I actually think that they do this well at first, and then it kind of falls apart. But it's a good example because it can serve as a contrast to show you, here's what you're doing when you understand your source material, or not your source material. Here's what you're doing when you're understanding your own material and how it works well. And here's how it falls apart when you don't. So when we're talking about Genie, obviously the big, huge elephant in the room is that Robin Williams, who played Genie in the original animated movie, has since passed away. And so obviously, even if they had wanted him back, if he had wanted to come back, and that seems unlikely, to be honest, he had a very contentious relationship with Disney, specifically over the role of Genie. But the point is, you couldn't get him back, even if you wanted to. And you can't replace Robin Williams, right? But they're in a position where they have no choice but to replace him. And so when the casting of Will Smith for the Genie came out, I was actually a huge fan of it. I thought that was a fantastic idea, because Will Smith has the ability to create a character that is going to be able to function in the story the way that Genie needs to function in the story, but is very unique and distinct from the character that Robin Williams created for the Genie. Because you can't imitate Robin Williams. God bless Dan Castellaneta, he tried, but you really can't. So it's much better to just do something different. Don't try to make yourself beholden to a version that you're only ever going to be an inferior version of, right? So the beginning of this movie seems to suggest that they actually did have a good understanding of that. They changed the frame story setup for the movie in such a way that is, partially to accommodate the subplot that they added for the Genie, but also seems designed to accommodate Will Smith and his version of the Genie, right? In the original animated version, the frame story is just this little merchant guy who is kind of implied to be the Genie. My understanding is in earlier drafts, he was the Genie, and they just kind of dropped that for where they closed that loop on that. But he's still sort of, the vibe is still there, and he's still played by Robin Williams. And again, my understanding of how this was done was they just put Robin Williams in a room with like a bunch of stuff, and he just ad-libbed a bunch of like merchant trying to sell various crap, and then used the best bits that were child appropriate. And that's what they did for that. And that plays to Robin Williams' strengths, right? He is a very good improv comedian, very good at doing sort of the rambling monologues. That is not Will Smith's strength. So this new setup instead has Will Smith as a sailor character, who this time they do close the loop. It is eventually revealed to be the Genie. So he's a sailor on a boat with his wife and his 2 kids, and the frame is setting up to him telling the story to his kids. So this frame story now plays to Will Smith's strengths of an actor, which is casting his children into every movie he's in. And also, just kidding, sort of, kind of. But his other strength as an actor is his ability to banter, right? His strength as a comedian is he can kind of be more on the straight man side or the funny man side of it, but when he has someone else that he can play off of. So putting him on this boat with this family gives him the 2 children and the wife as well to play off of, and plays into Will Smith's strength as a comedian. So that was very well done. Again, it's letting Will Smith create a character that still functions in the way that we need the Genie character to function, right? We are still getting Genie to set up, to be that frame story, to set up telling us the story of Aladdin, but in a way that is distinct from the way Robin Williams did it. anyways, they drop that aspect of it, and the rest of the movie, Will Smith is just kind of doing a Robin Williams impression. Like, not a full-on impression, but it's very clear that in any scene that is, you know, taken from the animated movie, they're trying to force Will Smith into a Robin Williams type character, and it does not work for him. There are some scenes other scenes that are unique to this movie, and those are definitely his best scenes. They're the funniest scenes with him. But there are a lot where, again, he's just being forced to be the Robin Williams version of the genie, and that doesn't work. Beyond that, though, there's more going on with the genie that just doesn't work, or at least adjacent to the genie that just doesn't work in this adaptation. So basically, how they are setting up the genie is a strong focus on the idea of rules, and specific rules, and loopholes, and being careful with your wording. It's a very kind of rules lawyer like feel to it, which we're not going to judge them for making the change, right? We said changes are good. I don't necessarily love that, but they could be going somewhere with it. They are not, but they could have been. So they set up this idea of, like, very early, they set it up with, instead of Aladdin in the animated version where he tricks the genie into getting him out of the cave just by kind of playing up the, I don't know, I don't really think that you're even strong enough to do that. I bet you couldn't. I bet you suck. And, you know, playing into Genie's ego so that he does it, you know, without Aladdin having to wish for it, all right? And that, we should point out, plays into the ultimate finale where Aladdin plays into Jafar's ego, like, you're not even as strong as the genie, like, you suck compared to him. And Jafar's like, I'll show you who sucks, I'm gonna be genie. And so basically Aladdin, we set up Aladdin tricking Jafar at the end by having him trick the genie in the same way at the beginning. And this one, however, how he tricks the genie into getting a free wish is they added this like rule where you have to actually be physically holding the lamp when you make the wish for it to count. And so Aladdin is holding the lamp, and Genie sees him holding the lamp, and he kind of puts it behind his back and lets go, and Abu grabs it. And I guess like Genie can sense a hand on the lamp, but can't tell whose hand it is or something. I'm not super clear on that. The point is, Genie didn't see that Aladdin had let go of the lamp, and so used his powers to grant the wish, but Aladdin wasn't holding it, so it wasn't really a wish. It didn't count as a wish. And then we also have a similar sort of thing with the second wish, where in the animated version, he just kind of has Aladdin, he's drowning, can't actually make a wish. And so Genie just sort of like pretends to mouth for him, like, yep, you wished it, that counts. Whereas in the live action version, Genie creates a contract that he like manipulates Aladdin's hand into signing to be like, yes, this is what I'm wishing for. And again, it's very similar scene, but it's a stronger emphasis on these like precise wording, exact rules kind of thing. And then we also have it with the way that the genie's, wishes are granted. They do a bit of a play on the whole, make me a sandwich wish, right? Where someone wishes for a genie to make them a sandwich, and instead of the genie making a sandwich for them to eat, the genie will turn them into a sandwich. They do a reverse on that, where Aladdin says something about a make me a prince wish, and Genie's like, hold up. Please consider that when you do that, I could just, instead of turning you into a prince, which is what you want, I could just create this random dude who is a prince for you, right? So this idea of you need to be careful and you need to be precise with your wording when you're making a wish, again, leans back into that. The rules are very specific, and you have to follow the specific rules because there are a lot of loopholes and sort of, that sort of tricky wording kind of thing. but that never pays off anywhere. And there's like an interesting sort of weird setup for a payoff where despite Aladdin having, accurately wished to be turned into a prince, it doesn't appear that that's what Genie has really done. They draw a lot of attention to it, where Jasmine's like, hey, I can't find this country that you said you were from. Like, what's going on here? And so first, Aladdin has to make up, oh yeah, he's from Abwabwa. It's a real country, I swear. And then she can't find it on a map, and Genie has to mess with the map to put it on there. So it seems very clear that the Genie never actually made Aladdin into a prince. He just, gave him a lot of wealth and the appearance of being a prince, but never actually gave him a country to rule or anything. And there's the possibility that in the original movie that same thing is happening there. It's not super clear as to whether Aladdin was actually a prince or if he was just made wealthy. But it doesn't matter in the animated movie because, first of all, they're not drawing attention to it constantly. And second of all, it's not a movie that's super concerned with precise wording as it is. This is a movie, the live action is a movie that is very concerned with precise wording, things exactly the way that you asked for them. So if Aladdin wished to be made into a prince and Genie only ever turned him into a rich guy, not a prince, there should be something there. We should be doing something with that. But we don't. And then ultimately at the end of the movie, again, we've set up all this stuff about, precise wording and such, and that should be how we are beating Jafar somehow. Just as a random idea, Jafar gets tricked into wishing to be the most powerful being in the world, and the Genie is able to manipulate that wish in order to turn him into a genie, which makes him the most powerful, but also forces him to live in a lamp and obey his master and all that. So that's, you weren't careful with your precise wording, right? But the movie ends in the same way, and they try to sell it to you as, oh, be careful what you wish for. But the problem was not that Jafar didn't word his wish correctly. He got exactly what he wished for. He just didn't think through the wish, right? He didn't think through all the consequences of what being a genie means. But he was not tricked into wishing for something that was they didn't take advantage of the way that he did the wish. So I feel like if you were watching the live action movie, having never seen the animated movie, it might not parse for you. You might just oh yeah, it came all together. But having seen the animated movie and seen how we use that same trick, and it's not really about the wording, it becomes clear that this ending isn't really building on the earlier setup. And so there's a lot more going on in this movie where it just doesn't really understand the stuff that it's bringing to the table. Jasmine's storyline is a mess. But I think with the Genie, I've made the point that I'm trying to make here, which is you do have to understand the changes that you make are implying certain things or setting things up, and you have to understand that so you can properly follow through. So like I said at the beginning, this is kind of, the other side of the same coin as the Mulan line, right? Where with Mulan, when we were talking about the avalanche, since you changed the setup to the avalanche, the payoff the avalanche doesn't work. And so it hurts that payoff, it hurts that source material. But also with the Genie, when you change the setup to be about these very specific rules and specific wording, and then leave the payoff the same as just sort of tricking Jafar by playing into his ego, it also hurts the setup. It makes the setup feel out of place as well. So looking at the way that these two problems are kind of showing the opposite sides of the same thing, if we look at them kind of holistically, that can lead a lot of times into our next problem. Problem number 3, what are you even trying to say? So when you do have that payoff and the setup aren't working well together, they could be clashing with each other, it makes your metaphors confused. It makes your theming confused. It makes it hard to understand, what is the point that you're trying to get at with this movie. And sometimes, rather than making it hard to understand, you start implying things that maybe, hopefully, you didn't mean to be implying. So for this one, we're going to be looking at the movie Maleficent. So before we get into this one, though, I do need to issue a content warning for this part for some discussion of sexual assault. There is no sexual assault in the movie, but there is an assault, and there are metaphors that are not subtle. And there's further muddling of metaphors that ends up kind of verging into like consent issues and whatnot beyond just the assault. I am going to start at the lighter end of things, and it's going to get heavier as we go. So if you ever feel uncomfortable, feel free to just jump ahead to the next chapter. Short version of this is this movie tries to handle themes of, or I assume it's trying to handle, it definitely implies themes about sexual assault and non-consent, and it handles them very poorly. I do not like the things that this movie is implying. So moving into this movie, it is trying to do kind of a Wicked thing here, like it's Wicked from Maleficent, where we're telling the story from the point of view of the villain. We understand more of their motivations and reveal them to be maybe not such a villain, more of an anti-hero, and we also get, part of that is getting some amount of backstory and prequel. So this movie is about 25 minutes prequel to the Sleeping Beauty movie, and then it goes into the actual storyline of Sleeping Beauty and tells a variation of that story, and it's told from Maleficent's perspective. And so I would say ultimately the biggest thing that is really bogging this movie down is that it wants to do Wicked, where Maleficent is revealed not to really be a villain at all. She is an anti-hero at worst, but at the same time it considers itself a little too beholden to certain aspects of the original fairy tale that clash with that goal. In particular, this movie maintains the curse scene, the scene where Maleficent curses a little baby. So that's hard to come back from and not be a villain, to be honest. And especially because they maintain the scene, the motivations for the scene are changed slightly, but not significantly. Like, this isn't like some sort of trick or something, right? She does genuinely want to curse this baby. And the wording of the scene is mostly intact. There are a couple of changes, and those are actually important. We're going to focus in on, starting with the most minor change in the scene. In the animated movie, when she's cursing the baby, her curse starts with kind of a conversational thing where she's like, yep, the little baby will indeed grow up in beauty and grace, loved by all who know her. And that does not, like I said, it's conversational. That does not seem to be actually a part of the curse. That seems to be just her, affirming these gifts that the other two fairies have already given the baby. Like, yep, she got those gifts. She'll have them. It'll be great. Then once she goes into the part where she's saying, but before the sun sets on, blah, 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 that's when she seems to start actually using the magic. Like, we see she's holding her staff and it's got like a little orb on top, and she's like doing this with her fingers, and she starts on that line, and we see like magic swirling in that orb. So our understanding is this is the curse. The curse is the whole part about her pricking her finger and dying. The live action changes it, so she's just kind of doing her fingers in the air, and we're seeing like clouds of like green smoke to imply the magic. But that starts at the line about she's gonna grow in beauty and grace, loved by all that know her, implying that that is part of the curse, right? Her curse is going to make, or she's gonna have beauty, she's gonna have grace, and she's gonna be loved by all who know her, which that's kind of prickly as consent issues just off the bat, right? The idea that everyone who knows Aurora loves her, not because she is just a nice person, but because she has some curse on her that makes everyone who knows her love her. And it becomes especially odd when you consider the implication of that is the reason that Maleficent ultimately, changes her mind and grows to love this little girl. She becomes like Suderi mom to this little girl, is because she got caught in her own curse. And that's great for defeating a villain, right? Like, we love that sort of poetic irony, triumphant turn where the villain gets caught up in their own curse and that's how they're defeated. But doesn't work so well in a version of the story where Maleficent is supposed to be more, anti-hero, right? That's just not satisfying, that the reason that she reached her redemption is because she accidentally cursed herself when she's supposed to be our protagonist. But okay, so let's dig a little deeper into this scene. Another change that they made in the curse scene was the fact that Maleficent was actually the one, she cursed Aurora to not to die, but to go into a sleep like death. And then she also, when Stefan was like, King Stefan was like, please don't do this, she also added the amendment to the curse that it could be broken by true love's kiss. And the reason she did that was specifically as a dig at Stefan. Because another thing that's different about this movie is in that prequel bit at the beginning, Maleficent and Stefan were actually friends as kids. Like, they had a childhood friendship that blossomed into a romance. And then on Maleficent's 16th birthday, so that's kind of, we assume maybe is where the 16 is coming from in the curse, Stefan kissed her, and he told her it was true love's kiss, and after which he stopped coming around Fairyland. Like, she lives in the moors where the Fays live, he lives in the human kingdom. He used to come visit her all the time, and then he stops after they kiss. Now, on a literal level, I'm pretty sure what we're supposed to understand is happening with these characters is Stefan, like, he had his own ambitions. He's king by marriage in this one, sort of. We'll get more into it in a minute. But so he has his ambitions that he was pursuing, and he just got real busy, and he stopped having time to come out to the moors where Maleficent lives to visit her. And the human realm and the moors are kind of at war, so she can't really go visit him. Like, she has real big wings at this point. Like, she can't exactly go incognito in the human realm. And so there is a sense that Maleficent, she was upset by this. She was upset that he kissed her and then just dissed her. But like, this is not, the actual real problem is going to come later. But this was an upsetting moment for her too. Especially with the later betrayal, I think made this one probably hurt worse in retrospect. And so that's why she uses the true love's kiss as the way to break the curse, is because, she at this point doesn't believe that true love's kiss is a real thing, right? He kissed her and told her it was true love's kiss, and it turned out that was a lie. So now she thinks it's fake. So, it's a way of taunting him. So the thing is, so like I said, on a literal level, it was kind of a coincidence that he stopped coming around then. But if we're looking at a metaphorical level, and maybe this is me reading too much into this, but on a metaphorical level, we have this guy and this girl who are close, and then he tells her, oh yeah, I love you. And then they share an intimate physical act, and then he ghosts her. So true love's kiss in this instance is a metaphor for them having sex, right? Like, I'm not crazy here. That definitely is, like, that's the vibe that it's getting with this setup. And I don't know if that was an accident and they didn't realize that was the vibe they were getting, or if they wanted to give that vibe in that moment, but like didn't want that metaphor to follow them forward. But that is the vibe it gave, and you can't just ditch a metaphor like that midway, which causes problems later when we actually get to the part where Aurora is now in her sleep like death. And her true love's kiss is going to come wake her up. So we start with Prince Philip. And he and Aurora had like one conversation. They kind of have mutual crushes on each other. I mean, I guess he maybe only likes her because that curse that makes everyone love her, but whatever. They have mutual crushes on each other, and he shows up at the castle, and the three fairies, I forget what their names. It's not Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather anymore. I think one's like Thistledown or something. I don't care. I'm not calling them that. So the three fairies see him and are like, oh, you can come try kissing her, you know. And it's weird. They don't ever actually explain to him that she's under a curse and this kiss could maybe wake her up. I don't know why they don't explain that to him, other than just to make him awkward for funnies, but whatever. So they're trying to get him to kiss her, and he's like, okay, and he's gonna do it, and he's like, y'all, this is weird. Like, I just met her one time. I shouldn't just like be kissing her while she's asleep. And like, you know, it's a consent thing. And in itself, it only works because the fairies didn't tell him about the curse, and so that part feels awkward. But if you look past that, it works as a joke. Like, it's because it's on par with the idea of CPR is a kiss kind of jokes, where we all understand that this is actually like a life-saving medical procedure, which is basically what it is when she's under a curse and a kiss is the only way to wake her up. So we understand that in reality, it's not actually a kiss. There's not actually consent issues going on here, but it's funny to joke about, right? But with the added layer of the true love's kiss maybe being a metaphor for having sex, those consent issue jokes stop being funny and just start being real creepy, real ooky. Don't like that. And then from there, we have Maleficent. So the kiss doesn't work when Philip tries it. So then Maleficent comes in the room and she gives Aurora a little kiss on the forehead, like, I'm sorry kind of kiss. And that does wake Aurora up, right? It's like meant to be a twist on the idea of, you think of true love's kiss, where true love is like your soulmate or whatever. But no, true love just meaning someone who loves you truly. And of course, not all love is romantic love. So Maleficent is Tsundere mom, and she truly loves this little girl and gives her a kiss on the forehead. True love's kiss, it wakes her up. So, you know, that's fine. Again, it's just a little weird in the context of true love's kiss being something that was metaphorically implied to be Maleficent and Aurora's father having sex previously, and now she's sharing it with her surrogate daughter. I don't know. Again, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but the vibes are there, and it is weird, and it's harder to let go in the context of the other stuff that this movie is doing with regards to sex and consent issues and such. So now's where we're going to get into the actual discussions of sexual assault stuff. So like I said, 16th birthday, true love's kiss. She was a little upset, but at the time she just kind of miffed about it. But like, you know, she's also still thought fondly back on him and, you know, their childhood friendship and whatnot. The turn came later. So the war between the Moors, where the Fae live, and the human realm has intensified, and the king, who is Aurora's maternal grandfather, so it's her mother's father, like, he's like really racist or something. Like, he hates Fae. And in particular, he really hates Maleficent because Maleficent is like the general of the Fae army. And so he tells all his advisors that, you know, the first person to kill Maleficent, he will name his heir, and that person will marry his daughter. Stefan is not one of his advisors. He's like a manservant, but he hears this. So he sneaks out to the moors and goes to see Maleficent and tells her, hey, I'm here to warn you about these guys that are going to come try to kill you. And she, like it said, she's kind of miffed at him for ditching her, ghosting her years ago. But like he apologizes, they talk it out, and they end up having like a really romantic evening. You know, they're sitting by the riverbed, snuggled up together. They share a drink. She falls asleep with her head on his shoulder. It's all very sweet. He drugged her. Yeah, it wasn't a drink that they were sharing. It's just a drink that he gave her that was drugged to put her to sleep. Because he's gonna kill her and become king. But oh, poor baby, he can't kill her. He drugged her, but he can't bring himself to kill her. So he's just gonna maim her instead. He's gonna cut her wings off and drag them back, and use them to claim that he killed her. And when she wakes up, Angelina Jolie, who's playing Maleficent, just gives this just real anguish, like sound, just so much, like sound of real betrayal and violation and pain. Like, again, it's the metaphor here. He assaulted her, he drugged her and assaulted her. And the metaphor for sexual assault is not subtle in this. It's not actually what he did. He just maimed her by cutting her wings off, which is also bad. But there's also a sexual assault metaphor to it, which is very obvious. So, unsurprisingly, she doesn't like him too much after that. That's kind of the turning point, like I said, where I feel like it made that earlier, betrayal, ghosting her cut even deeper now. And that part in itself, I mean, it's kind of heavy. Like, Disney, you sure you want to handle that in your movie? But it's not a problem in itself. The problem is how the story unfolds from there, which is we move into a woman scorned story. Maleficent is very much becomes evil because she is the woman scorned. And that would have worked fine with the whole kiss thing, and him ghosting her, right? That could have played well into, because he kind of seems to be after this, at least at first, to be like, he's just the guy who, kind of fucked up when he was younger, but he's grown since then, and now he has a great job, he's got a wife, he's got a little baby daughter that he loves, kind of moved on with his life, and here is this woman scorned who cannot let it go, and finds out that he has a baby now and is so jealous, and turns up to make a menace of herself. But he didn't dump her. He drugged her and assaulted her. Like, and the story does end up turning at that point, right? Where Maleficent comes to love this little girl, and she opens her heart back up to love again and stops being so evil. Whereas he becomes obsessed with her as she kind of lets him go and lets this hurt go. He becomes obsessed with her, in a paranoid way. Like, it goes from justified fear of this woman who is very powerful and just showed up in his house and cursed his baby, to this full-on paranoid. He sits there, he still got her wings up in a trophy case, and spends all time talking to them, and I think he might even think they're talking back. I don't know. He kind of loses hold of himself to the point when Aurora shows up, he just doesn't even care anymore. He doesn't care about her. But again, it doesn't make sense. That shouldn't be it's a turn, and I prefer him as the bad guy because he drugged and assaulted a woman. But the implication is not that he is a bad guy because he's the kind of person that would go after a woman that he had feelings for. I don't know if he ever really truly loved her, but their friendship as children was a real friendship. So he had some real feelings for her, but was still okay to drug and assault her for his own ambition and continue to keep her wings as a trophy. I understand that his father-in-law was probably the one who put them up there in the first place, but he keeps them hanging there. Like that should tell us a lot about the kind of man he is, but the story is not interested in what that tells us. It's only interested in him becoming paranoid after Maleficent has attacked his baby. And honestly, I'm also not super comfortable with the idea that this woman, she became evil because she was assaulted, metaphorically sexually assaulted, and then found love again because she became a mother. Not to say that that can't happen. It's just, it feels a bit ooky in terms of that's the direction you want to take this movie, and I don't feel like we were careful enough with it if that's where we want to go. And just overall, the way this movie is treating sexual assault and someone who is implied to be the victim of sexual assault, it's not impossible that someone could take that pain and turn it into anger and to lash out at people who don't deserve it. That definitely happens. But I don't know that that was the best choice for this movie. I don't know that this movie had the ability to handle that turn, and it definitely did not execute it well. So I just don't think that was a way you should have gone at all. And I don't like what this movie implies about perpetrators of sexual assault, that he was just a fine dude, again, especially with the way that he chooses not to kill her. And we're very focused on there's a lot of focus in that moment of how anguished he is, oh, I can't do it, because he cares about her too much to kill her, so he's going to maim her instead. And that's better, which I guess on some level, yeah, I'd rather be maimed than dead, but that doesn't make you a better person if that's what you did. So yeah, not happy with it. I don't know how much of that messaging was intended on their part and how much of it was just a bad fumble, but it's not good. It's not good. Problem number 4. The medium is the message. Okay, so switching into a lighter gear now, I want to circle back to what I said earlier about having an animated movie versus a live action movie are very similar experiences, because that is true, but they are still different. Animation and live action are different mediums, and they have their own strengths and weaknesses. And so if you are making an adaptation moving between these two different forms of media, it is important that you understand these different strengths and weaknesses, so that you know how to best preserve the story you're trying to tell, how to best present the story that you're trying to tell, from one medium to another. And so just as a very short high overview, with animation, obviously you have the ability to show things that in live action would be impossible, or at the very least impractical to try to film. And you also have a higher suspension of disbelief with animation generally. Whereas with live action, first of all, from just a pure practical standpoint, it is a lot easier, takes a lot most time and effort to just film two actors having a conversation than it does to animate two characters having a conversation, especially if we're talking about a very emotional or very big energetic conversation. And then also live action tends to just have slightly more impact, all other things being equal. Your brain just sees it and it looks real, right? It's real as opposed to animation, so it can hit a little harder. There's other aspects and factors there too, and I'm definitely not an expert on that, but kind of some of the basics there. And then of course between those two we have a sort of middle ground with photorealistic CGI. So yeah, this part's going to be about the Lion King, and how the photorealistic Lion King fails to do justice to the story that it's trying to tell. So the first thing in that area that I have to mention, but we're going to try to keep it short because honestly, a bunch of people have already talked this to death. But there definitely is a problem where in the animated version, because that higher suspension of disbelief, they were able to cheat a little bit with how they were drawing the lions and make them look a little bit more human, make them express their emotions, like in terms of like their facial features and such, in a slightly more human way than actual lions would. Which just makes it, easier for the audience to understand what's going on, easier for the audience to feel those emotional beats. Whereas in a photorealistic CGI, the point is to make them look just like real lions. You can't really cheat that same way. I mean, you can, but if you're really trying to make it look like live action footage, you can't. And so what the animators would need to do to compensate for that is to have a lot more body language, make them a lot more overt in how they're expressing their emotions in terms of, like, we want to see those tails whipping around and ears pressed down, up, and all sorts of stuff like that. And we do see that sometimes, like definitely Pumbaa has this moment where he's got like an excited little prance going on that definitely communicates to the audience that he is happy, he's excited. I think it's technically a little bit more dog body language than warthog body language. Not that I know that much about warthog body language, but the point is made and we understand how Pumbaa feels, and that's what's important. But for the most part though, the movie fails to deliver on this. Just a lot of times, like, we do get some body language, but not nearly to the degree that we would need to get the emotional impact, especially in some of these really heavy moments. And definitely I want to be so clear when I say that we are not blaming the animators for this, right, you guys? We are blaming the executives who undoubtedly did not give these poor overworked animators enough time to give these characters all this expressiveness, right? Because even though it looks like live action, it is still animated, and so that one of those drawbacks of animation is it does take a lot of time and effort just to have two characters having a conversation, okay? So that is a problem with the movie, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page that we're blaming that problem on Bob Iger. We're not blaming that problem on, like, on Stefan Lewis Hoare. I'm sure Stefan worked their butt off. Good job, Stefan. We appreciate you. All right, so we had to talk about that. But that set aside, what I want to spend a little bit more time looking at is the decision that was made to make all the scenes and footage. Is footage the right word when it's animated? The footage in this movie look like a documentary. So you can see to a certain extent how they are in fact trying to incorporate this new medium with that idea, right? If you are ever taking live action footage of animals in the wild, and although this movie is CGI, not live action, they very much wanted it to be seen as live action. That's what they called it in like all the promotional materials or whatever. It's the live action Lion King. So if we're taking live action footage of animals in the wild and it's like professional footage for a movie, that's going to be a documentary, right? So making their animated footage look like it was a documentary does lend an air of authenticity to it. And just to be clear, when I say authenticity, what I mean is it makes the animation feel more authentically live action, right? It adds an air of realism to it. But the question we have to ask ourselves then is realism what we want to go for when our movie is Hamlet with lions? Like, that doesn't quite track. And ultimately what that means is that the visuals that we are getting are taking away from the story at times. Like, for example, in the 2D animated version, when Simba and Mufasa are standing on top of Pride Rock, looking at, Simba's future kingdom. And Simba asks, what about the shadowy region over there? We are able to get kind of in the background, we see the shadowy region. We see this section of the savannah that is like inexplicably darker than the rest. And if you're looking at it and you sit there and you think about it, there's not really anything that's casting a shadow over the entire region. Like the region itself is a bit rocky and can be casting some shadows, but the entire place, including the height of these rocks, are all like dark and dingy, like the hyenas are evil and giving off some sort of miasma or something. So if you sit there and think about it in those realistic terms, it doesn't really make sense. But with animation, like I said, you get a higher suspension of disbelief, and you're not necessarily thinking about it in really realistic terms. Simba points out a shadowy region, you see a shadowy region, checks out to me, and you don't really think about the realism of it. Then in the photorealistic version, where they are, again, really trying to make sure it's realistic, when Simba asks about, the region beyond the shadows, again, it's the flat savannah. We don't have anything that's going to be casting like big shadows. So he says that, and I'm looking at the savannah, and I'm like, what shadows? What are you talking about, Simba? There's like some tree shadows here and there, but there's no like big shadowy region that I'm supposed to be looking at. I guess maybe we're supposed to assume it's like off to this side. Like they don't pan the full savannah. They like pan like this, and then we don't really see totally everything that goes on over here. I guess that's where the shadows were. So yeah, it doesn't track. It doesn't make sense. Another example of this would be the stampede scene. So in the 2D animated version, the camera focus is very much on Simba and the stampede, and like the edges of the gorge and such are out of focus, which obviously in animated, that's like a deliberate choice. It's not literally out of focus, but they made it look that way so that our attention is going to be square in on Simba and the danger that he's in. So obviously that builds higher, emotional stakes for us in that moment. But it also has another advantage. With the photorealistic version, all the edges and everything going on in the canyon are very crystal clear and sharp, because that's kind of more what you would want in your documentary footage, mostly I would assume. And it is all, like all the landscapes, it's all animated, but it's also all very based on like real pictures of, the real savannah. But the thing is, when you have like this whole crystal clarity, we as the viewers can see all these little like nooks and crannies and edges that Simba could have been hiding in to protect himself from the stampede. And honestly, it might not even be that big of an issue, except for the movie itself kind of draws attention to that. There is a point where there's like a little tiny ledge, like the floor of the canyon's like this, and there's like a little bit of rock jutting up like this to make a little tiny ledge right there. And little baby Simba like hides. One second. So like there. And then we get little baby Simba hiding under the ledge. Like you see, he's hiding like right. One second. Okay, so little baby Simba's hiding in the ledge like this, right? And so the wildebeests are running across the top of this and kind of jumping over him and end up down here. He's got a little bit of protection in this little corner here. Unfortunately for Simba, it's not a super stable ledge. Like as the wildebeests keep running over it, it starts crumbling and he has less and less protection, so he kind of gets shoved out of it. But he does briefly hide in that little area. And so they draw attention to the fact that he can find little corners and crevices to hide in. And so now I'm looking around and I'm seeing this very sharp, clear background, and I can see, well, why isn't he ducked behind that little, one of these little deals right here? You can duck right back there, and then wildebeest would never get him. It's not a big deal, and I don't think everyone's being distracted by that. It's just a little touch that kind of takes away. It's something that we should have been thinking about when we are making our choices. And then another aspect of this whole trying to make it look like documentary footage thing is kind of about some of the choices that they make as far as what they're going to show. Because the thing is, in a documentary, where I'm watching a documentary about lions, and we cut for a little bit to go look at some giraffes, and then we look at a little dung beetle, and then we look at some ants, and what all they're all up to, I'm okay with that, because while it's happening, David Attenborough is telling me all about these giraffes and dung beetles and ants, and how they are a part of this ecosystem that the lion is in, and it's all very circle of life, right? It's interesting stuff. But in this Hamlet with Lions movie, where we don't have a narrator talking to us, when the footage kind of meanders off for a while and we're not paying attention to any of our characters, we're watching a friggin' dung beetle roll a ball of dung across the screen for like minutes of screen time. It's so long, you guys. So long. Why? It doesn't add anything. It just slows everything down. And yes, that is very much like a documentary footage, but it works in a documentary in a way that it does not work in a story that is supposed to have a certain kind of pacing and stakes and characters that we care about. So ultimately, when we look at this choice to take this and make it look like documentary footage, what we're finding is they made a choice about, this is a live action media. That's what we want it to be perceived as. So this is what we're gonna do with our visuals to fit that. But then they did not have any consideration for how that would affect the story. And you can go either way with this, right? You could say, hey, we want this to be a photorealistic CGI, but we also have to recognize that this is still Hamlet with lions and kind of accommodate that. We can't always be 100% live action looking and realism and whatnot, because the story itself is not totally realistic, right? Or you can go in the other direction. You can say, hey, this is what we're interested in. We're interested in making this photorealistic CGI look like it's live action. We're interested in making this sort of look like documentary footage. So we are going to change our story to accommodate that. Like if they did photorealistic live action The Lion King and it was all documentary and there was no voice actors, no characters, it was just like Morgan Freeman narrating the whole thing, I would watch that. I don't know if I would like it or not, but I would definitely be into checking it out. And it would be a more creative and unique thing than whatever they were doing with this movie. So yeah, there's just no consideration here for how that photorealistic CGI, how does that work with your story? How do we play into the strengths of it to serve our story? Or if what we care about is the medium, how do we change our story to fit that? Problem number 5, do you even want to be here? So there's a trend in movie adaptations over the past couple decades. And for the moment, I'm talking about all the movies that have come out that are based on an existing franchise or IP, not just the Disney ones. There is this trend where sometimes you will get an interview from the director where they will admit, and admit's really not the right word. Admit implies shame, at least some measure of it. No, they have interviews where they will just say with their full chest, oh yeah, I never watched the franchise that this movie is based on. I did not care about that IP. I thought the characters were stupid and boring. And I'm not going to sit here and speculate on why executives would give a big movie about a franchise with usually with a huge existing fan base, to a director who does not care about it. I have thoughts on that. None of them are kind, but we're not going to speculate today. just acknowledge that this is something that happens. And so with the Disney movies, there are certain things that I can see in some of the movies that made me wonder if, maybe that's also the case for these movies. Do these directors also not care about the source material? But I don't like to make that call in the absence of any interviews where the director is asserting that to be the case, right? There are a number of different reasons why these little clues that I'm seeing could be showing up, and I don't feel comfortable making assumptions about what's in these people's hearts. Except for Tim. I feel real comfortable assuming that Tim Burton's heart contains no love for Dumbo. Tim Burton does not care about Dumbo. But I care about Dumbo. I care about Dumbo a lot. And I'm real mad that this movie, which honestly, for my money, is probably one of the best candidates for a live action adaptation for a number of different reasons, was given to a man who clearly has no interest in it and feels that his personal beef with Disney is more important than the story that he is meant to be telling. And so, like cards on the table, I should probably be clear that when I say I care about Dumbo, I don't necessarily mean that I liked the original movie in its entirety. That movie wasn't really made for me, to be honest. It was made for a 1940s audience who were just as, if not more so, interested in seeing the things that the animators could do with this still relatively new art form as they were in seeing the actual story behind this movie, or within this movie. And it was also a movie that was made for a 1940s audience who were going to be comfortable with, a fair amount of casual racism just sprinkled on in there. It's pretty bad, y'all. So not for me. But the story of Dumbo that exists underneath the animation fluff and the casual racism, that I care about very deeply. Just to give you guys an idea, the first real strong emotional beat of Dumbo's story is about, so we have Dumbo, and he is a little child, he's a little baby elephant with big ears, like just enormous ears. They're so big that he actually has trouble walking because he's constantly stepping on and tripping over his own ears. So this little baby, he looks different from the other kids. And all the kids come to the surface and they're all laughing at him. They're all making fun of Dumbo and his big ears. But Dumbo, he's just a little baby, right? He doesn't understand. He sees these kids laughing and he thinks, oh, we're all having fun and laughing together, ha ha ha. And he plays up his big ears because he thinks this is something that we are, again, having fun with together. And it's not until the children start grabbing on his ears, right? He looks different, so they feel entitled to touch his body. They start grabbing and pulling on his ears that Dumbo gets scared and he runs to hide behind his mother. And now Mama Jumbo has been watching all this happen, and you can tell, she's older, she's more knowledgeable, she has more experience. She could tell right from the beginning that these kids were making fun of her child. But she was anxious about it, at the same time didn't really know how to intervene and not make things worse, right? But finally, when her little baby is hiding behind her, she steps up, she feels like she has to do something. So she grabs the child who was like the ringleader of this group. Can I make that metaphor in a circus movie? Like, is that confusing? She grabs the child that was the leader of this little group that was harassing Dumbo, and she gives him a spanking. And as a reminder, this movie did come out in the 40s, so to the audience that would be watching this movie, we're meant to understand that this response for her is a reasonable response. Like, this is the correct action to take with a misbehaving child. It is proportionate to what he has done and is, the best way to discipline him and improve his behavior in the future, right? Shakes his child, she spanks him, which we understand is a reasonable response in this context. And yet, instead, the way everyone else responds is by calling her a mad elephant. She's crazy. She's out of control. We gotta lock her up and take her baby away from her. And so poor little Dumbo, who did not have a father and now has had his mother taken away from him, and is sitting among these other elephants who are sit there and gossiping about his mom and talking about, well, yeah, sure, she did it to protect her kid, like, whatever, I get it, I guess, but it's her fault, you know, she should have kept herself under control. And throughout the movie, these elephants continue to engage in respectability politics. Dumbo continues to get blamed for, you know, causing trouble when the root of the problems really are, you know, from the circus, you know, the people in power, the systems in power. We get Dumbo eventually gets shuffled off to be the clowns, which are like the bottom tier in this circus hierarchy. He gets put with the not the troublemakers, but the analogy of the troublemakers, the troubled kids class. And then even these clowns don't treat him well, right? They treat him as, for lack of a better word, subhuman. They treat him as a prop for entertainment, not a thinking, living being with feelings. To the point that we as the audience have just watched poor little baby Dumbo just sobbing his eyes out because he is embarrassed and ashamed and he is hurt and he is missing his mother. And we finally see him get to have a little bit of comfort, but she's locked up and chained up inside this cart, so she can only get like this much of her trunk outside the window to cradle her poor little baby who is all alone in this world. So he's got a little mouse friend, but other than that, completely by himself. And then we go back to the clowns, who are confidently asserting that elephants don't feel pain. Do you see now? Do you understand why I care so much about Dumbo? This is a story that deserves to be told by someone who cares about it. Frankly, it's a story that deserves to be told by a Black director as well. For the very least, it's a story that deserves to be told by someone who really understands the story of marginalization going on here. But we gave it to Tim. And what does Tim Burton do with this story? Well, first of all, Dumbo is not really a character in this version of the story. Dumbo is a prop, a metaphor meant to advance the story of the white characters. And I wish that I could credit him at least that the protagonist, none of these characters really have that much importance or weight to them, to be honest, but the protagonist-ish of the movie is a man with only one arm. He's a disabled man. And then also we have his daughter, who is a girl in the 1940s who wants to pursue a career in science. So you would think, okay, well, maybe at least there is an understanding here of this as a story of marginalization. But the fact that Colin Farrell's character only has one arm is even less important to this movie than Dumbo is. And while the girl wanting to pursue science has a little bit more weight to it, there does not seem to be any understanding by the movie that this is something that she is going to have to deal with prejudice to pursue. Like, it's just she and her father have some issues between them, but it seems to be like an interpersonal issue. It's not that, sexism is going to create issues for her in the future. So this movie takes about 40 minutes to tell the story of the original Dumbo movie, hitting the key plot points, or at least the points that the movie thinks are important, but does not particularly dig into the emotional weight of those plot points on Dumbo, because we don't really care about Dumbo's emotional interiority at all. And also, definitely downplays the exploitativeness of the circus. Like, it's still there. You can't tell the story of Dumbo without that being a part of it, but it's definitely trying to like make it less bad. And the reason the story is doing that is because after we get the story of Dumbo out of the way in that first 40 minutes, we use the remaining 72 minutes of runtime to tell the new story about evil Walt Disney. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure if this character is meant to be Walt Disney or if it's meant to like be a dig at some particular executive that Tim has a problem with, or if it's, you know, just meant to be a general personification of the Disney company as the whole. But evil Walt Disney with Dreamland, Disneyland, coming in and he buys up the circus, and now we understand why the circus is made less exploitative, because we want to paint this as, you know, the little small town down home mom and pop circus that gets gobbled up by the big mean corporation Disney. And then from there we go into this whole thing about big bad Walt Disney and how he's so mean and how he is even more exploitative than the circus was, and he is bad, and he bought up Dumbo's mom, Mama Jumbo. He only was able to buy Mama Jumbo because the circus sold her. But don't worry about that. He bought her, and he's mean, and he's gonna have her put down because she's distracting Dumbo, and because there's hate in his heart, presumably, and he's evil. And so the movie becomes about the circus having to band together to get Dumbo out of there and get him back home to India, which again is not because the movie is particularly concerned with Dumbo's emotions that much, but because it's a metaphor for the whole circus and how they're gonna get away from big bad evil Disney, and they start up a new circus, and there's no animals in it. There are animals in it, but there's no animals in it. We're not exploiting animals anymore. Yay! So it's not a story about Dumbo at all, and it's not a story about marginalization at all. It's a story about this circus, and it's a story about how big corporations are bad and exploitative. And so as you sit here and watch this movie that has nothing to do with the story that it's based on, really, the inevitable question arises of, Tim, do you want to be here right now? Interlude. You're telling me a queer coded these villains? Okay, so this part, I'm calling it a bonus round. And that's because I don't necessarily want to focus on just one movie for this one. And it's not really about a general problem that with adaptation. It's a very specific problem related to Disney adaptations. But since this is a video about Disney adaptations, I would feel remiss if I didn't at least touch on it briefly. And that problem is related to the fact that Disney, one of the things their movies are known for is having very iconic villains, right? Like they have a whole board game about it. It's a really good game, by the way. I definitely recommend it. So Disney villains are very iconic, and the Disney villains in the live action adaptations generally are not. And sometimes that's somewhat unavoidable, right? With Cruella and with Maleficent, when you're trying to do a Wicked style retelling of these stories, obviously the villains are going to have to change in that process. And even if you do still manage to create a good character out of that, it's not a character who is going to be an iconic villain, right? That's not really what that story is about. And then other of them, like with Jafar, there is definitely a factor there where the Jafar in the original animated movie was a racist stereotype in many ways. And so, of course, when they're redoing the movie for the live action, they're wanting to make some changes to make him less of a racist caricature, which that's good. We like that, right? But in the process of making those changes, they ended up losing that iconicness. And it didn't have to be that way, right? It's not him being a racist caricature that makes him so iconic. But on the whole, if they are trying to figure out how to do this adaptation and they're struggling with that process, I would much rather them land on the side of less iconic, but also less racist, right? But then also we have some characters like with Scar or with Ursula where there's no reason that the character should have to lose that really iconic edge that they have. And Ursula in particular is an interesting one because like with Melissa McCarthy playing this character, like if, like Disney parks, like their theme parks, they'll do like shows in them sometimes. And so if I was in Disneyland or Disney World and went to go see a show in the park and we had Melissa McCarthy as Ursula in the show, I would walk out saying, hey, that Ursula was pretty good, right? They did a good job casting her. That was a really good like Ursula impression. But it was an Ursula impression, right? She was trying to recapture the original Ursula, but she didn't really manage it. It was missing something. And though my bar for actors in a show in a Disney park it's not a low bar, right? It's a reasonably high bar, but it's not nearly as high as the bar that I would set for a big budget Disney movie. So another fun fact about Ursula's character that I'm sure most of you are already aware of, it's a pretty common fun fact about her character, is that she was based on drag queen Divine. And Melissa McCarthy, to my knowledge, is not a drag queen. Also, her makeup artist was not a drag queen, and bam, you can tell. Now, Ursula is mostly in like lower lighting throughout the movie, which I mean just makes sense for her character. So it's not as super obvious, but yeah, that makeup's not even. And like, I'm a basic bitch when it comes to makeup, so if I'm noticing it, there is a problem. And that problem there is, I think, what underpins a lot of the problems, what makes a lot of these villains less iconic than they should be. And that's that the Disney villains are frequently very queer-coded, and the live-action Disney villains are not. And so I think that is a big part of what's underpinning this whole thing, right? Our live-action villains a lot of times just tend to be boring. They're just boring. Photorealistic Scar, he is so tiring and dull to watch. I'm so tired when I watch him because he feels so tired. And a big part of that difference there is that the original Disney villains are frequently very queer-coded. And the live action and photorealistic versions of those villains really aren't. And I think something just gets lost in that translation. Additional caveat. Some of them are good, actually. Okay, so here now, over 2 hours into this video about why the Disney live action adaptations are bad, is where I have to admit to you that not all of them are bad. Only about 60% of these movies are bad. In fact, exactly 60% of these movies. 6 of the 10 movies that we're discussing here today, and interestingly, 9 of the 15 that I watched, which is also 60%, are bad movies. Then the remaining 4 of those 10 are, well, they're not bad anyways. Some of them are even good. So in the interest of fairness, we're just going to spend a little time talking about those 4 that are not bad. Starting with Pinocchio and Lady and the Tramp, as those 2 are both kind of the ones that are in the not bad tier. They're perfectly serviceable. They're C-tier movies, right? Both of them do an adequate job, competent enough movies telling their story. reasonably faithful adaptations that still incorporate some of that change that we're looking for. With Pinocchio, most of those changes are really just about kind of tightening the story up a little bit, just making the whole thing flow a little bit smoother, a little bit more coherently. It really watches a lot like as though the animated version was the first draft of the movie, and this live action version is now their second draft. And really, they probably needed 3 or 4 drafts. But overall, it's a mild improvement, reasonably good. Then the other, Lady and the Tramp, with this one, the changes were less focused on improving the story and more changes about kind of telling their own version of this story, particularly with their own version of the characters. Lady and Tramp are especially pretty different as characters as opposed to the animated version. And while the changes did not work for me personally, that was a me personally thing. It's just a taste issue, not that they were bad changes. Overall, I would say describe the changes probably as considered and confident. They had a good understanding of what they wanted their version of the story to look like, what they wanted their version of the characters to be like, and they made decisions, mostly smart decisions, on what to change to achieve that end goal. Now, unfortunately, I don't really consider any of these changes to really elevate the material. It's not really in conversation with the material either. It's just different, which is fine. Again, C tier, perfectly serviceable. If you liked Lady and the Tramp or you like Pinocchio, you can check these movies out. You may well like them. Then moving on, we have the one that I did kind of already mention, The Jungle Book, which is now legitimately a good movie. They incorporated, I would say, both kinds of changes here, both the changes that improve the story and changes that make it their own version of this story. But unlike with Lady and the Tramp, I feel like these changes really do exist in conversation with that original movie. The original movie ends on the message of, Mowgli does need to go back to the man village. He has to go be with his own kind. Panther would not marry a bear, no matter how much Baloo insinuates he's just waiting for Bagheera to ask him already. Whereas with the live action, and honestly, it took me by surprise. I assumed that we were working towards that same end. And by the end of the story, I was starting to get a little skeptical. I was like, I don't feel like they built to that properly. And then they surprised me and they said, no, actually, this story is about how Mowgli should stay in the jungle. He should stay with the people that he has known his whole life, that he loves and that love and care about him. And, sometimes a family can be a man cub and his 2 gay bear and panther dads and his girl boss she-wolf mom. And I like that. Like I said, I like that it seems to be responding to what the previous movie was saying. And overall, we kind of tightened up some of the plot, raised the stakes somewhat. And just, it was a good job all around. And the visuals are very good too. And then the 4th movie on this list, and the one we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about, and one that was also genuinely good, I felt, and my one chance to be really topical in this video would be the live action Little Mermaid movie. And I realized maybe that sounds a little weird after I just spent a bit of time talking about how the Ursula was subpar, but I mean, she was subpar, but she wasn't god-awful. And Ursula is just one character, and she's not even remotely the most important character, right? The most important character is Ariel. And Halle Bailey knocked it right out of the park. And Eric was also really good. I felt that they had good chemistry. He matched her energy really well. And that's, as much as we would love to have a good Ursula, given the choice between a good Ursula or a good Ariel and Eric, you have to choose the latter. But since we're specifically talking about adaptations in this video, we can look at how this one is good, how this one succeeded, where the other adaptations failed. So first of all, looking at understanding your source material, I definitely feel like this movie showed that it had a good, strong understanding of what the original Little Mermaid movie was and was about and the different parts of it. To give a specific example of that is in this movie, they gave Eric his own grotto. So one of the really iconic parts of the animated Little Mermaid movie is when Ariel sings Part of Your World in her grotto, all filled with all the human stuff that she's collected over the years. And you can tell that this movie does have a good understanding of how this is a very important iconic scene and why it's so important. Not necessarily because of the way that they did the scene in their version. It was fine. I thought the lighting was a little dark, but it was fine. But what really shows their understanding of this scene, I think, is the fact that they gave Eric, again, his own equivalent to a grotto. It's not a literal grotto. It's more like a study. So after Ariel has arrived at Eric's castle, she actually takes a little nap first, but then she goes exploring around the castle and she comes across this room that looks to be like a study. And it wasn't like totally closed off, but it definitely looks like it's maybe a disused room or kind of a private room. It's not like a library that everyone goes into or anything like that. So Ariel is exploring around this room, checking out all the cool stuff in there. And then Eric comes in and he is so excited to see her. Because it turns out it's his room, it's his collection of all the things that he's found in his travels. Because in this version of the story, they really play up the fact that Eric loves to go sailing and he loves to go explore, go to new locations, meet new people, learn new things about these different cultures. But the thing is, as much as he loves that, nobody else on his island really is that interested in it. I mean, I'm sure there are some sailors who enjoy sailing, but like nobody else who lives in the castle with him, nobody else that he really interacts with on a social basis really cares, right? There's a reason that room looked kind of closed off and disused, and it wasn't because Eric didn't want people in there, it's because nobody else was interested in ever going in there. So he's so excited to see Ariel in this room and to see Ariel taking an interest, and she's excited to see all these things he has, and she's excited to show him some information that maybe he didn't know. Like she shows him how to blow on a conch shell. He's not very good at it, but he's excited to learn about this. And we end up panning it. It seemed like it was maybe like late afternoon when she went exploring. Next we see him, it's like full dark outside and they've got a pile of maps and she's sitting here pointing at stuff on the maps and he's pointing stuff out and telling her, you know, this is this is that. She's pulling more maps down. Show me this one. Like they're really interacting, have a good time. They're really connecting. Which shows, again, that you understand the purpose of that grotto scene. You understand how that's supposed to give us insight into Ariel's character. And then we mirror it with this scene. And it also shows that they understand one of the weaknesses of the original animated movie, which is that Ariel and Eric's relationship is kind of underdeveloped. So they found a way to take one of the strengths of the original and one of the weaknesses of the original and bring them together and really shore up the weakness, but also just make both of them better than the sum of their parts. And then that new study, Eric's grotto, also qualifies as their own material that they're adding, and it is part of this whole plot line that they're adding. Plot line may be a strong word for it, but like story character arc kind of thing that they've added for Eric, where, like I said, we've really leaned into how much he loves exploring and going to new places, but we've given him a mother. He has an adoptive mother, so he actually was washed up on their island as a baby as a result of a shipwreck, and the king and queen took him in and adopted him. And we're meant to understand this backstory like on a metaphorical level. It speaks to why he loves to explore so much, and on a very literal level, it speaks to why the queen doesn't want him to go out sailing. She is convinced that the sea gods or spirits or whatnot have an in for their island. And that if they go sailing, they just are at higher risk of getting wrecked and he's gonna die. And so she doesn't want him to go anywhere. Now, they obviously did somewhat make it easy on themselves in that Eric's character arc here is basically just Ariel's character arc, but like in the opposite direction. But it still is a coherently well done arc for him. Like it comes together cleanly. And they make it work that they made that decision, right? This becomes a point that Ariel and Eric can bond over, and that can be part of the foundation of their relationship, right? Where they both have experience with wanting to be free to explore and to learn new things and go to new places, and they have no overbearing parent that won't let them. So that was a new aspect of Eric's character that they wanted to introduce in this movie, and I feel like they have a good grasp on that, and have a good grasp of how to incorporate it into the original source material so that it all works together and all improves each other. And then from there, that flows very easily into what their core messaging is, right? They have kind of two main messages here. The first one is, of course, the line Sebastian has: children have to be free to live their own lives, right? That's what Ariel and Eric are dealing with overbearing parents who have to learn to let go. And then the other message is about how the merfolk are suspicious of the humans, and the humans are wary of the merfolk. I don't know that they actually know that there are merfolk per se, but they know that there's like people living in the ocean of some kind, spirits, gods, whatever. And they are wary of them, and both sides need to learn to come together and work in community with each other. And importantly, the messages work really well together, right? The underlying plot of Ariel and Eric's relationship speaks to both of those messages. Then in terms of switching mediums from purely 2D animation to a live action with also some photorealistic CGI put in there, I think they did pretty well with that. A lot of the live action stuff, just like little minor changes here and there just to make certain scenes flow better, hit better in live action as compared to what worked best in animation. Nothing huge. As far as their photorealistic CGI, it was a little bit more of a mixed bag. Some of the stuff was really good. I was so impressed with Ariel's hair underwater. Like, she looked like she was underwater and her hair was floating around her. Like, it was really well done. So that was good. A lot of like the oceanscapes were pretty impressive. Sometimes the lighting was dim. I don't know like what department that falls under, if that's really lighting department or if because it was part of it animated, it's animation. I don't know. But they were generally pretty impressive to look at. As far as our photorealistic characters, especially I'm looking at Sebastian, Flounder, and Scuttle. If you look at like the character models, like just like a still of them, they're not god awful, but they're not great. They have a certain like smoothness to them. I think they still just look a little bit cartoony. But I did find once I was watching the movie and the characters were, moving around and talking and emoting, the fish manages to emote, which is pretty impressive, right? Emoting, expressing themselves. It didn't bother me so much. I was able to accept them as, characters in this reality. And my suspension of disbelief was able to kick back in for me. And as a totally uneducated, uninformed guess, it seems like that was maybe due to a shift in priorities here, as opposed to like in The Lion King, where they were more focused on making sure that the characters felt real, like real characters that we were watching, as opposed to making sure that they looked like real, in this case, fish. And in terms of priorities, I think that would be the correct choice to make, right? And also, as a side note, our buddy Stefan from back in Lion King, yeah, they brought him back to work on this one too. So good job, Stefan. I knew you could do it. Good luck with your unionization efforts. I really hope I don't get like some other animator come in and be like, oh, I know Stefan and he is an asshole. That would be real embarrassing. Stefan, I hope you're a cool dude. Anyways, and then as far as the last one about whether they really want to be here, again, I can't speak to what's in their hearts. I don't know how much anyone who worked on this really loves The Little Mermaid, but the movie that I saw suggests to me that they do care about this movie and they do care about this story. And then as a final point, and this isn't really directly related to any of the specific problems, but it is relevant to the way in which Tim Burton showed that he didn't care about Dumbo. And it is something that I feel like I just really want to bring up if I'm going to be talking about The Little Mermaid. I really loved Black Ariel. I think Halle Bailey did a fantastic job, fully deserves the role regardless of race, but I also appreciate their decision to make Ariel black. Obviously, I'm like half ghost. I can't speak to this personally, but I do understand that representation is very important. And also, my understanding and what I've heard is as important as characters like Tiana are, princesses who were always black and were always designed to be a black Disney princess, having a really well-established, really well-beloved character like Ariel or like Brandy Cinderella before her, be black, just hits different in terms of representation. And it is something that is also very important and very needed. So, you know, kudos to them for that. So that was our little interlude, a chance to talk first of all about the villains and then to talk about the movies that are actually good and make sure we're giving credit where it's due. And now let's get back into discussing the problems with these adaptations. Part 6, bad faith criticisms and internet hot takes. So at last we come to my nemesis. Nemesis even, multiple of them in this part. The first, of course, being 2017 live action Beauty and the Beast. And the second being edgy internet hot takes. And when I originally filmed this part, I had this whole long section talking about movie analysis and criticisms and good faith criticisms versus bad faith criticisms and etc., etc. And it was like 15-20 minutes long in a part that is already going to be super long, you guys. So let's keep it to the point. When I talk about a movie critic, internet edgelord, you guys know the guy I'm talking about, right? He's the guy who just cannot accept that there might be a movie out there that was not made for him. So any movie that doesn't cater to exactly what he wants out of a movie is obviously bad. He's the guy who's not racist, but he's not homophobic, but he's not misogynistic. The movie is misogynistic for not creating female characters that fit into his perfect perception of what a strong female character should be. Anyone who wants to dump on the live action Cinderella is still invited to fight me, by the way. He is the guy who has to analyze every single detail in the most literal way possible so he can find as many plot holes as possible, right? And he is the guy who loves to hate on the popular thing because it makes him feel like he is smarter and cooler and better than everyone else. You know the guy, right? We're all on the same page here. So I have my top five in how much I hate them, internet hot takes on the animated Beauty and the Beast that the live action movie decided that it just had to address. Starting with number 5 is the complaint that, you know, this castle is so close to the village, but the villagers don't know about it. What's up with that? That's weird. It's a plot hole. And this is what I would probably call an accurate criticism, but not a valid criticism. It's accurate in the sense that it is describing something that is real and true about the movie. The castle does appear to be close to the village, and the villagers do appear to be unaware of the castle. So that's true, it's accurate, but it's not valid because it's not really engaging with the movie in the terms that the movie wants you to engage with it. Not everything that a movie doesn't explain is a plot hole. A movie has a limited amount of runtime, and so it has to restrict itself to explaining the things that are important. If it's not important, we're not going to explain. And if we do explain, it implies that it is to some degree important. So when we look how the movie treats this potential plot hole, you can infer that the castle must be close to the village based on how long it takes the characters to travel between the two, but the movie does never actually state anything along those lines. And you can assume, based on the villagers' reaction to seeing the beast in the mirror, that they weren't aware of the castle, but it's never actually stated, and it's possible that they were aware the castle was there and they just thought it was like abandoned or something. So when the 2 points that potentially conflict aren't even directly stated by the movie, of course the movie is not going to spend time to then explain why these 2 points technically don't actually conflict. If it's something that you've noticed and bothers you, you are welcome to come up with your own explanation. There are plenty of options. Use your imagination. The live action movie feels like, no, it's got to explain this plot hole. So what it comes up with is part of the curse was to erase the memories of everyone of the castle and of everyone who lives in the castle. And if it had limited it to just like a mention at the beginning that had happened, and then maybe another quick mention at the end that part of the curse has been broken too, just to sort of close the loop there, that could have been fine. As long as you keep it to a simple, like 1-line, 2-line explanation like that, it still doesn't give that particular point that much importance. We're throwing an answer out there real quick so people stop complaining about it. But this movie takes great pains to bring attention to this. Like, they're, I assume, proud of themselves that, look, we fixed the plot hole. So we spend a lot of time at the beginning with Mr. Potts, though he only goes by his first name at that point, so we don't spoil the twist. And he's wandering around town talking about how he's forgotten about something, and he's constantly talking about how he's forgotten something. And then we reveal at the end when we find Mrs. Potts and Chip, and he is reunited with them. Oh, he's Mr. Potts. He forgot about his wife and his son. And we also see a lot of other people from the village all reuniting with the people from the castle, and like everyone is suddenly remembering all their loved ones that were up at the castle, and it's a big deal. We make a big deal out of this. And when you make a big deal out of it, when you tell me it's important, now I'm going to start asking questions. So what exactly happened that Mrs. Potts and Chip were in the castle when the curse hit, but Mr. Potts was in town? Like, do they all normally live in town and Mrs. Potts was up at the castle for work? Why was Chip at the castle with her then? And then what did Mr. Potts think after the curse hit and he forgot about his wife and son when he went home? And it was clearly a home for 3 people, not a single bachelor. Like, did that raise any questions for him? Did the curse also alter the contents of his home? Or did they all live and work in the castle normally and Mr. Potts was just in town, like, I don't know, getting a beer at the tavern or something? When the curse hit then, what was his, how does his brain explain to him what he had been doing for work? Where he'd been living? What he'd been doing with his time beforehand? How does that work? And asking all these questions, and there's a bunch more you could ask about how this memory loss thing works, maybe is not totally engaging with the movie in the best faith, but the movie is somewhat inviting questions by putting that much emphasis on it, by telling us this is a fairly important point. And they would have been better off if they just hadn't mentioned it at all. Number 4, where is Belle's mom? This one is interesting in that I can pretty reliably, I feel, identify what the underlying criticism and underlying valid criticism is that then got turned into this sort of bad faith criticism that the movie is trying to address. So the underlying criticism is about a trend across Disney princess movies where a lot of these girls and young women have a father but no mother. Or if they have a mother, the mother has a very small role, like Aurora's mother. I think she has 1 or 2 lines in the entire movie. In any individual movie, this isn't a problem. Sometimes teenage girls, young adults, only have a father. It's a thing that happens. But the fact that it continues to show up across so many different movies is something worth thinking about and talking about and unpacking. And people have definitely had those conversations. And in turn, it's also something that ideally Disney should try to be aware of in the future. And when they're making their movies, think about, hey, did we do the thing again where there's just a father and no mother? Is that really a necessary choice for this movie, or could we rework it and get mom back in there in some capacity? But then this criticism about general trends of mothers being absent and why movies have been written that way somehow becomes a complaint about, where's Belle's mom? We don't understand. Apparently, we, the viewers, are too stupid to understand the idea of single parent homes or the possibility of a mother dying while someone is a child, unless that is spoon-fed to us. And I don't know that that's necessarily, I hope that's not a complaint that anyone is legitimately having, that, hey, the movie didn't tell us where Belle's mom is, therefore that is a plot hole. But that does seem to be the complaint that the live action movie is trying to address. Belle's mother is dead for this entire movie. We get one flashback where we briefly see her on her deathbed, but other than that, she's never physically present in the movie, and she doesn't have very much emotional presence either. Like, Belle is somewhat interested in her, but she doesn't really know anything about her mother. She's not like aspiring to be like her. She's not inspired by her. There's nothing about her mother as a person that Belle is interested in or invested in, because she doesn't know anything about her mother as a person because her dad won't tell her anything. But she's also not super interested in knowing about her as a person. Belle seems more invested in figuring out the mystery of how her mom died. And we figure out the mystery, and it turns out she got sick and died. Like, it's not even an interesting answer, and then nothing comes of it. It's not relevant at all. The mother gets mentioned one time after that. She has no impact on Belle and her life and her emotional journey. Belle and Beast don't even have a bonding moment over the fact that both their moms are dead. Like, we get nothing from it. The only 2 things that Belle's mother does, and she doesn't do them, it's just they happen to her, really, that have any sort of impact on this plot. One, the fact that her mother dies of plague is what prompts Maurice to take his little baby daughter and move from Paris to this small town. And 2, the biggest impact that she really has is Disney can point at her and say, hey, look, Belle's mom is in this movie. We did it, you guys. Number 3, there is a line in a song early on where Belle says that she wants adventure in the great wide somewhere. So people take that line and say, hey, look, she said she wanted adventure, but then her happy ending at the end of the movie is that she just gets married. And that's sexist. And for some reason, wanting adventure seems like it always gets translated to meaning that she just wants to travel. I guess that whole line about great wide somewhere, they just assume that means she wanted to go see a lot of stuff. But for my money, going to an enchanted castle full of furniture that's actually people, and with a master who is this big, monstrous beast who over time you learn is actually a kind and caring person, and you slowly fall in love with him. You meet Prince Charming, but you don't discover that it's him until chapter 3. And then you have a daring rescue of your father, followed by a daring escape, followed by another daring rescue of the beast that you have come to love, and then you break the curse and return everyone to their human forms. That sounds like an adventure to me, right? She didn't travel much of anywhere, but you don't actually have to travel to have an adventure if a really cool adventure happens to be happening in your backyard. And I already kind of alluded to this, but it seems to me that Belle was also interested in romance, right? Her favorite part from that book that she was reading was about how the heroine met Prince Charming. Like, it seems like maybe a happily ever after, where she gets married to a Prince Charming of her own, might have been within the realm of things that Belle wanted, in addition to her adventure in a fun enchanted castle, which she got. But the live action movie, heard people say, she didn't get adventure, she needs to travel. And they were like, we're on it. And did the worst possible job at it that anyone could have. So they introduced this magic book that can take you anywhere. And just as a concept, introducing something like that to a Beauty and the Beast story, a story that is usually very focused on being trapped in this one location, it's an interesting concept. I'm not sure if that's something that would take the story to cool and interesting places, or if it was something that would just end up breaking the fundamental structure of the story. And I still don't know what that would do, because the way this story introduced that object was unclear and confusing, and they dropped it almost immediately. I am not clear on whether this book that takes you anywhere actually physically transports you to new locations, which that is kind of what's implied by the fact that Belle is able to take her old baby rattle from the home that they lived in Paris when she was a baby. Or is this more like a spirit journey where you can just see other places? That's kind of what is implied by the fact that they watch Belle's mom, like on her deathbed, being diagnosed with the plague, but nobody else in the room seems to see Belle and Beast there. Like, they don't interact with them. They don't seem surprised that there's this big furry animal just standing there in clothing. So I don't know if it's actual like teleportation, or if it's just like really cool magic VR. And also, apparently it has time travel. Like I said, Belle's mom died when she was a baby, but we were able to go back and see her before she died. So they didn't really mention that the book could do time travel. It just sort of did it, and we're just kind of supposed to accept that that's something that the book can do. And then the book's never brought up again. We used the book to find out how Belle's mother died, a plot point that I already said didn't matter, and then we never ever talk about it again. Why was this even here? Beyond just proving, look, we gave her adventure, we gave her travel, except for you didn't even give her that. She had a spirit journey to past Paris, which when you say it like that does actually sound pretty cool, but it wasn't much of anything in the movie. Number 2, why did the enchantress curse the servants to become furniture? They didn't deserve to be cursed. And to get into that, first we kind of need to talk about the enchantress a little bit and the way people perceive her. And this is a problem that the animated movie kind of has too, but a lot of people seem to think of her as overall, generally speaking, a good person, or a force for good at least, right? The curse was her teaching a necessary lesson to a bad person. It was good and it was justified. And that's why we're a bit miffed about the fact that she also cursed the servants, because they didn't deserve that. It wasn't justified in their case. And the enchantress is a good person, so why is she doing bad things? But for my money, there's 2 different ways that you can engage with the enchantress. The first one, and the one that I prefer, and the one that I believe that the animated movie is most heavily leaning into, is that the enchantress is just a plot device, right? She's a way to take the metaphorical story that we're trying to tell and turn it into something literal. You know, she is a metaphor. She's not a character. And that's why she doesn't ever actually show up in the story, right? The only time we really see her is just as part of this sort of stained glass representational thing. She's not a real character. And then from there, you can look at the literal things that are happening on screen and understand the metaphor that they're trying to communicate to you. So when we talk about why the beast is a beast, it's because he's just a beastly person. You know, he's a bad person. He's selfish and shallow and vain and self-centered, and he does not have compassion for other people. He's a bad person. He's a beast. And then over the course of the movie, as he learns to become a better person, he becomes less bestial and more human. And we see that transition even before he transforms back into a human at the end, right? At the beginning of the movie, he's got on like tatty shorts and a cloak, and that's it. And he's running around on all fours, and he's snarling and growling all the time. He is very animalistic. And as the movie progressed, we get to the ball scene where he is all done up in his fancy suit. You know, he's standing up on his hind legs. He's out there dancing with Belle. They have a very elegant dinner. He is fully presenting himself as a human. And then our real ultimate expression of that, of him being human, is when he decides to spare Gaston's life, right? He's got Gaston, hold him over the edge, and sets him down instead. And even though the movie then still takes another couple minutes for him to actually turn back into human, that we can understand is really the ultimate point of humanity, where he really deserves to be human again. And under that understanding, the condition of learning to love another and be loved by them in return could be understood to be a metaphor about how love can make you a better person, can bring out the best in you, both by loving other people and, you know, receiving love can bring out the best in you. Honestly, there are a ton of other ways that you could understand the beast metaphor, but that's just like one example, and I think it's probably the one that the movie leans the most into. And then we look at the servants. Why are the servants cursed? Why would they get turned into furniture? Well, that's because that's the way the beast sees them, right? Like we said, he was selfish and shallow and vain, and he didn't care about other people. And as one of the manifestations of that is he didn't see his servants as people. He didn't see them as people. He saw them as walking, talking furniture. He saw them merely as extensions of the service that they provided for him, not as living beings with their own thoughts and feelings and deserving of their own respect. And so as he improves and as he ultimately becomes human himself in the end, part of that is learning to respect his servants as people and to see them as people. And what do you know? They turned into people. So that's a metaphorical way to look at her. And like I said, that's my preferred way of looking at her. But your other option is you can look at her as a character and understand her as a person with, you know, thoughts and motivations of her own. But the thing is, if you want to understand the Enchantress as a person, you have to understand that she's a bad person. She's not good, you guys. At best, maybe she's some kind of fae, and her morality just doesn't really map onto human understanding of morality in the same way. But if we are going to understand her and judge her based on human morality, then we have to understand her as a bad person. Because here's the thing. Was it wrong when the beast turned her away and did not let her come into his castle to shelter from the storm outside? Yes, absolutely. That was a very bad thing that he did. Does that then in turn give her the right to violate his bodily autonomy and turn him into a big giant monster? No, it does not. Nothing gives you the right to violate someone else's bodily autonomy. Like, no, you don't do that. That is a bad thing. That is a thing that bad people do. Because first of all, punishment doesn't work, right? Theoretically, this is supposed to be a punishment for trying to cast her out in the cold to teach him to not be so inhospitable in the future. But punishments at best teach people to be afraid of getting caught. It doesn't actually teach people to be a better person. And his case, he didn't become more hospitable to travelers, right? When Maurice came into his house looking for shelter from the cold, he was like, hell no, in the dungeon with this guy. And I don't know that I can totally blame him, considering the last old person who came to his house looking for shelter for the cold turned him into a monster. I don't know that I would have a lot of love in my heart after that either. I understand why he might be suspicious. And the other thing is, she's also pretty much shut him out of the possibility of learning the lesson that she supposedly wants him to learn. She tells him that he has to learn to love another and earn their love in return, but unless she's expecting him to fall for one of his servants, which, like, that's kind of ooky, how is he supposed to have an opportunity to meet anyone and earn their love? He's a big furry monster. And I understand that she's trying to make a point about beauty's only skin deep and it's what's on the inside that matters. But there is a pretty big difference between being a haggard old lady and being a big furry wolf, bear, lion, buffalo monster thing. Like, where is he gonna find a furry in the French countryside in the 1800s? Furfest didn't exist back then. He has no options. He got incredibly lucky with Belle that worked out. And in point in fact, it only worked with Belle because he had actually continued to be a shitty person for this whole time and only kind of turned it around right at the end there, right? If he hadn't thrown Maurice in prison and hadn't accepted Belle's exchange, which was also kind of a shitty thing to do, right? Then this would never have happened. And he would have stayed a beast forever. So this punishment that she's giving him, first of all, did not serve to protect herself because she was not actually in any sort of dire straits in the first place, did not help protect future travelers from this happening again because he did the same damn thing to Maurice, and did not help to teach him the lesson that he was supposed to be learning. The fact that he did end up learning it was just an incredible lucky coincidence because Belle is amazing. So yes, the fact that she also cursed the servants that didn't even do anything to her is bad. But it doesn't take something good and justified that she was doing and make it bad. It just takes something bad that she did and make it a whole lot worse. And yet, in spite of that, the live action movie decides they're going to lean into this idea of the Enchantress is a character and she is a good person. Like, she is very much, very literally a character in this movie. Like, she's got a name and everything. Or it might be an alias. I'm not super sure on that, but we all call her Agnes. And she is hanging around in a bunch of scenes. She saves Maurice's life at one point. She shows up at the end to lift the curse. She is a character and she seems like an all-around pretty great gal. But she still cursed the servants. She still did that. That was still a bad thing that she did. So the movie has to come back around to explain that. And the explanation that they give is that the prince was abused by his father, the king, and the servants did nothing to stop it. The servants did not intervene with the king abusing his child. Like, first of all, it is never a bystander's fault that someone is being abused. If a child is being abused, it is the fault of the abuser. And with a child specifically, there can sometimes be, certain other people who are kind of responsible for stepping up, but it's not just any random bystander's responsibility. Like, they may not be in a place or have capacity or have the correct knowledge and know-how how to go about that. It's not their responsibility. And then, these are not just random bystanders. They are servants, and the abuser is the king, right? There is nothing they could have done in this situation. There was no way that they could have improved things for the prince, and there was no way that it was going to work out well for them. The best that they could have hoped for if they tried to stand up for the king is that they would get fired. That was best case scenario here. And then, what about Chip? The 5-year-old little boy. Is Chip at fault for not intervening in this abuse? Is Chip to blame? This 5-year-old child? Like, he might not have even been born when this was going on. Especially if the king is dead. Like, I feel like he's dead, but I don't think that's ever actually confirmed. But if the king is dead, then this abuse obviously stopped at some point in the past. Chip might not have even been aware of it. It seems very likely that Chip was not aware of it. Why are we punishing Chip? Why is Chip at fault for this abuse? You can't justify this. There is no way to take the idea of the enchantress also cursing the servants who have done nothing and justify it. It's a bad thing, and you just have to accept that your character did a bad thing. And then finally, we have number one in hatred in my heart. Belle has Stockholm Syndrome. So, first of all, we are taking those words out of your mouth. We are not saying that again. We are never using that term again, because Stockholm Syndrome is not real. And please understand, when I say it is not real, I mean it was made up by a guy to diagnose a woman he had never spoken to in response to her criticizing him, right? There was a hostage situation. He was helping the police. They handled it very poorly. They got a man killed. And not like even one of the hostages, just some other random innocent man. They dragged him in and he got killed. And when one of the hostages came out afterwards and was criticizing them, people went to him and said, "What do you think about this criticism of you and the job that you did?" And he says, "Oh, she's just crazy." So yeah, not using that term. But there is another similar criticism here, which is that Belle is an I can fix him girly, right? Beauty and the Beast is teaching bad messages. It's teaching girls to go after shitty guys so that they can fix them. And saying, yep, that's the thing you can do. Beauty and the Beast is doing the opposite of that. Do you guys not understand the function that Gaston has in this story? Right? Gaston is the shitty guy that Belle clocks right from the beginning. He is a shitty guy and she wants no part of him. And the Beast is at first a shitty guy and Belle wants no part of him. And it's not until he saves her life and then starts treating her with kindness and caring and compassion that she starts to open back up to him. If he's kind to her, then she will respond by being kind to him. But if he is mean and cruel to her, she will respond by telling him to fuck off. But of course, course, the live action movie has to fix this, has to prove that, Belle is fierce and independent and blah, blah, blah. And in the process, undercuts the actual emotional beats of the story. In particular, I'm thinking of two different changes that the live action movie made related to this. The first one is about the circumstances under which Belle becomes a prisoner at the Beast's castle and sort of the consequences of the change there. In the animated movie, Belle finds her father locked up in a tower, and she offers herself in exchange to the Beast. And the Beast is willing to accept this trade as long as Belle agrees to promise that she is going to stay at the castle forever. And Belle promises that she will. The exchange is made, and then Belle is led down to a new bedroom, and she of course goes because obviously she'd rather have a bedroom than a cell up in a drafty tower. But then after that, she proceeds to refuse anything that the Beast asks or tells her to do. He tells her, hey, we're gonna have dinner together, and she's like, no, we're not. And then he tells her, okay, fine, don't have dinner with me, but you can't eat unless you eat with me. And she's like, no, I think I'm gonna go find some food anyways. And then she gets a tour of the castle, and the Beast had previously told her, don't go in the West Wing, it's forbidden. And she's like, I think I'm gonna go check out the West Wing. So Belle promised to stay, and because she gave her word, and Belle is the type of person who keeps her word, she's gonna stay. But she didn't promise him anything else, and so she's gonna do what she wants. She goes to the West Wing, she sees the rose, she starts to touch it, and the Beast leaps in, screaming at her, throwing furniture, and she runs out of there, and she says, as she's running out the front door, promise or no, I can't stay here. She makes it clear that not only is she unwilling to put up with any of his shit beyond the bare minimum of what she promised, also, if she feels that her safety is at risk, her promise is less important than that. Belle has her priorities in order, and she proves it to us here. With live action Belle, there is no promise. She engages in like some weird trickery, basically, to get the trade-off made. And she tells her father, like whispers it in his ear, that she's gonna try to escape. Don't even worry about it. And once she gets escorted to her room, we see her immediately getting started to work on some bedsheet rope. So this Belle has no promise keeping her here. She is immediately ready for escape. Then when she does exit her room, and immediately Lumiere is right there like, hey, where are you going, girl? She gets distracted and decides to go eat a meal, and she decides to go on a tour, which feels a little weird when escape was her priority, and like it's not like the candlestick's gonna stop her. But, I can respect the logic of the choice to go get a meal before you go traipsing off in the woods in the middle of the night. And there's less logic in the choice to go get a tour of the castle, but whatever, she's nosy. I get it, girl. So yeah, she goes, she explores, she also finds the rose, she also reaches out to touch it, and the Beast jumps in and is yelling, and she runs to go leave. Except for, again, she doesn't have a promise that she's breaking here. Leaving was always the plan. So the fact that she leaves now, that she's in danger, doesn't really prove anything to us. It does not prove to us that Belle has her priorities in order in the same way as her making a promise and then subsequently being willing to break it does. The other point that I want to address is towards the end, at the ball scene, right after they finish dancing, they walked out into the balcony, and the Beast is preparing to confess his love to her, but before he does so, he asks her if she's happy, and she expresses that she misses her father. So he offers to let her look in the magic mirror, and she sees that he's in trouble, and the Beast releases her from being captive and tells her to go save her father. So that whole thing plays out in both versions. Where we have a difference is in the animated version, when he asks her if she's happy, she initially says, yes, I am happy here with you. It's just that I do miss my father. Versus in the live action, when he asks her if she's happy, she says, well, can anyone be happy if they're not free? And I get what the live action version is trying to do by adding that line, but it undercuts what the scene is actually meant to achieve. First of all, it kind of gives a weird dynamic to Belle's feelings in this scene. So when animated Belle says, yes, I'm happy, that implies that even though she didn't originally choose to be here, she has over time come to like it here, and she would be here by choice. Like technically, she does still have this promise holding her, and the Beast does have to tell her that he releases her of it, but she may well have decided to come back of her own accord afterwards anyways. And to be honest, and I can't prove this is just a vibe for me, I definitely feel like the Beast, he was real quick to be like, you gotta go. I feel like if he had been a little less quick on the draw there, Belle would have been asking, or possibly even telling him, like, hey, so my dad needs me. I'm gonna go. I'll be back. I promised. So I will be back. But I'm gonna go. Save my dad. By contrast, with the live action Belle saying, you know, can you be happy if you're not free? That's telling us that she feels that she is not free to go. Like, she's not free. She's not here of her own accord. That tells us that she still sees herself as a captive and Beast as her captor. That makes it weird when just a couple hours later in universe, she's coming in and saying, oh, I love you. You love him, but like 3 hours ago, 2 hours ago, I don't know how long passed, you thought he was holding you prisoner? Like, okay. That just seems a little weird, especially for a movie that's out here supposedly trying to make people think it's less Stockholm Syndrome-y. But the other bigger point that I want to address is how it undercuts the Beast. When animated Belle says, yes, I'm happy here, she's telling the Beast that she's likely to be receptive to his love confession. There is a reasonable chance that she might even reciprocate. And so when he then later tells her that he's releasing her from her promise and telling her to go save her father, he is giving that up. He is meaningfully sacrificing something that is important to him, sacrificing his wants and his needs to put Belle's wants and needs first. And that's what really proves for us that he does truly love her. Live action Belle says, can I be happy if I'm not free? She says, no, I'm not happy here because you're keeping me prisoner. If she still sees herself as his prisoner, then the odds of her being happy to hear him say that he loves her, the odds of her saying, I love you back, seem very, very, very slim. Like, he is not in a good position here. And so when he tells her, you can go save your father, he's not really giving anything up because he really wasn't in a good position to get the thing he was hoping for anyways. And not only is he not giving anything up, he's actually making the smartest possible move that he could be making in his position right now, right? Belle says, can anyone be happy if they're not free? Well, the only chance then that he has of making her happy, of making her have, this positive regard for him is by setting her free, right? She says she's not happy because she's not free. Maybe if he sets her free, she'll be happy. It's a long shot, but what else does he have at the moment, right? She's definitely not going to be happy if he doesn't set her free. And if she's not happy, the odds of her being in love with him are not great. So, I don't necessarily think he was thinking of it in these terms, but that's the reality of the situation. He did not sacrifice anything to let her go. He just made the best possible move for himself that he could at the time. And so the real thing is here with the whole accusations that Belle has Stockholm Syndrome and that as a criticism is you're never going to escape it. You are never going to escape that criticism with a Beauty and the Beast story, not unless you're willing to make some major changes to the structure of the story, which it's pretty clear that's not what they were interested in doing. You're just going to have to accept that there are always going to be people who say of Belle, oh yeah, she just has Stockholm Syndrome. There are always going to be movie critic, internet edgelords who are going to be engaging with your movie in bad faith and have bad faith criticisms. And all you do by trying to address those criticisms is make your movie worse and tell those edgelords, hey, you're right, and we'll do whatever you tell us. Conclusion. The real problem is, so here we are at last at the end. And at the end, we need to circle back around to the beginning and to our question of, what the hell happened here? Why are these movies so bad? And I also want us to circle back to that idea of a lazy cash grab. Because the thing about a lazy cash grab is when you say that, it has certain connotations to it. When you say it with regards to movies, it implies that a studio is putting a minimum amount of time and resources into creating a movie and banking on some sort of gimmick, usually name recognition, to sell the movie for them, and just counting on the fact that they don't actually have to sell that much in order to make their money back. So they have a high potential for profit relative to the amount that they spent on it. And that's not what's going on here with these Disney live action adaptations. You can just look at the budgets for these movies and you can see that a lot of money has been poured into them. So it's not that. But there's no reason that a cash grab has to be lazy. There are other ways to make a grab for cash. We already discussed with the photorealistic CGI in these movies how the animators probably were not given the time that they needed to really fully animate these things to the level of expectation that we would have for these kinds of movies. And I would say that with the unionization efforts that we're seeing from the animators and the VFX artists at Disney, and with the strikes happening with the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild, it's pretty clear that workers at every level of making these movies were being exploited. And while it is not impossible to create a good movie while exploiting your workers, you're playing the odds against yourself. Exploited workers just tend to not do as well at their work. And to be clear, it's bad to exploit your workers because it's bad to exploit them. Exploiting people is an inherently bad thing. It's just saying that in addition to it already being bad, you're also less likely to turn out a good product. So that gives us one explanation and one factor in why these movies were probably so bad. But the reality is this kind of exploitation is pretty clearly rampant throughout Hollywood, and there have been plenty of good movies turned out. So that can't be the only factor at play here. There has to be something else going on making these movies bad. When we turn back to that explanation of it being a cash grab, minimizing the amount of time and resources you spend on making the movie is not the only way to maximize your profit. You can also try to make a grab for money by just trying to bring more money in. Try to get more people spending money to see your movie or merchandising, etc., etc. And it would seem obvious that the best way to maximize the amount of money you're bringing in, especially when you are Disney, a big, huge studio that doesn't really have to worry about marketability. Like, I know that sometimes smaller indie projects might have to consider marketability of their movie as a trade-off for artistic integrity to make sure they're making their money back. But with Disney, if they put a minimum of effort in, these live action adaptations are going to market themselves. They don't have to worry about that. So if that's not a concern, then it seems like the best way to get lots of people willing to spend lots of money to see your movie would be by making a really good movie. And while that's obvious to you and me and anyone else who has the logical reasoning skills to realize that the reason Disney can continue to make so much money on these live action adaptations is that the originals were really good movies. So people are still willing to spend money on them because they were really good. But a lot of the executives don't seem to share that opinion. The impression that I get seems to be that they are more likely to have like a checklist of these are the marketable things in their mind. You know, here is our big name director. He is a director that will make lots of money for us. Doesn't really matter if he cares about the source material or not. He's a big name director. Done. Here are a list of things that people said that were bad about the animated movie. So you need to fix all of those things in this new version. And then here are our parameters as far as the movie has to be progressive to appeal to that audience, but also here's the maximum amount of progressive it can be. It has to keep it reined in so we don't turn off the conservative audience. So here's your window on that, and you have to get it right in that window. No, we don't really care what your plans are for incorporating feminism in the movie. You just have to make it girl power. Please and thank you. And when you start thinking of lists of things like that, where we're not caring about how this is going to work in a movie and how this is going to make a good, engaging story, we're just worried about we need everything on our list. How a movie could turn out to be like the live action Beauty and the Beast starts to become clearer. It really starts to come together and make sense. So when we look at all this all together, the real problem here is not that they're lazy. The real problem is they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Hi everyone, thanks for watching this monster video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.